What would you do if the person who destroyed your life asked if you were still angry? That's the question Nathan Cole faced when his former boss, the CEO, who fired him for a crime he didn't commit, finally spoke to him again after 5 years. But here's the twist. Nathan wasn't cleaning executive offices because he failed. He was there because he knew something that could bring down the entire company. And the woman who ruined him? She was about to discover she'd made the biggest mistake of her career. If you want to see how this story ends, stay until the final word. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The first thing you need to understand about Nathan Cole is that he became invisible by choice. Every morning at 4:45 a.m., while the city of Seattle still slept beneath a blanket of Pacific Northwest fog, Nathan pushed his maintenance cart through the gleaming marble lobby of Orion Dynamics Tower. The building rose 43 stories into the pre-dawn darkness, a monument of steel and glass that housed one of the country's largest financial technology firms. At this hour, the lobby felt like a cathedral, vast, silent, and cold. The only sounds were the soft hum of the ventilation system and the rhythmic squeak of Nathan's cartwheels against polished stone. He moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who had perfected the art of being overlooked. Gray uniform, downcast eyes, a posture that suggested weariness rather than capability. To the early arriving executives who would stream through the revolving doors hours later, briefcases swinging and phones pressed to their ears, Nathan was part of the building's infrastructure, as unremarkable as the elevator buttons they pushed or the light fixtures that illuminated their paths. But invisibility, Nathan had learned, was a kind of armor. It protected him from questions he didn't want to answer. It shielded him from the sideways glances and uncomfortable recognition that might come if anyone in this building actually looked at him, really looked at him, and remembered who he used to be. Because 5 years ago, Nathan Cole hadn't pushed a mop cart through these halls. 5 years ago, he'd walked these same corridors in a tailored suit, carrying financial reports that could move markets, making decisions that affected hundreds of employees and millions of dollars. He'd occupied a corner office on the 14th floor with his name on the door. Nathan Cole, Director of Financial Analysis. He'd been respected, trusted, on track for a VP position before he turned 40. Then it all came crashing down in a single afternoon. Now, at 38, Nathan's life had shrunk to fit the boundaries of what he could control. He woke every morning at 4 a.m. In the small 2-bedroom house he'd managed to keep in the Greenwood neighborhood, a modest bungalow with a postage stamp lawn and a maple tree that dropped leaves into the gutters every fall. He made coffee in the same chipped mug he'd used for a decade. He checked on his daughter, Lily, still sleeping in her room decorated with drawings of horses and stars. He left before she woke, drove 20 minutes to downtown Seattle, and began his shift at Orion Dynamics by 4:45 a.m. By 1 p.m., when his first shift ended, he'd drive to Lily's elementary school, pick her up, take her to whatever after-school activity filled that day's schedule. Soccer on Mondays, art class on Wednesdays, library time on Fridays. They'd eat dinner together at the small kitchen table. He'd help with homework, read her a bedtime story, tuck her in with a kiss on the forehead. Then, 3 nights a week, after Lily was asleep and the neighbor Mrs. Chen had settled into her usual spot on his couch with her knitting, Nathan would drive to his second job, night security at a warehouse complex near the industrial district. He'd sit in a booth from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., watching monitors and walking perimeter checks, accumulating the extra income that kept the mortgage paid and Lily's life stable. It was exhausting, relentless, a grinding routine that left little room for anything except survival and the fierce, protective love he felt for his daughter. But it was stable. And stability, Nathan had learned the hard way, was worth more than ambition, especially after everything he'd lost. The marble lobby of Orion Dynamics stretched out before him like an ice rink. Nathan began his routine, wiping down the reception desk, polishing the brass railings that lined the staircase, checking the floor for scuff marks. The building wouldn't truly wake for another 2 hours, but there were always early arrivals. The obsessive traders who wanted to catch the East Coast market's opening, the anxious junior analysts trying to impress their supervisors, the executives who wore their early arrival like a badge of honor. Nathan had learned to read the building's rhythms. He knew which executives took the stairs instead of the elevator. He knew which offices stayed lit past midnight. He knew the sound of Victoria Hale's heels on marble, sharp, precise, unmistakable, long before she came into view. Victoria Hale. Even her name felt like cut glass in his mind. She'd been promoted to CEO 18 months ago, ascending to the top of Orion Dynamics with the same ruthless efficiency she'd brought to every role she'd held. At 45, she was brilliant, driven, and utterly uncompromising. The business press called her a transformational leader. The employees called her Ice Queen behind her back, though never loud enough to be overheard. Nathan called her the woman who'd ended his career without asking a single question. He'd managed to avoid any direct interaction with her for nearly 3 years. It wasn't difficult. CEOs didn't notice maintenance workers. He could be 10 feet away, cleaning windows, and she'd walk past him talking on her phone without a flicker of recognition. Until 6 weeks ago. That was when it happened. Nathan had been cleaning the executive corridor on the 14th floor. His old floor, though he tried not to think about that. It was early, barely 6 a.m., and the offices were still dark. He was wiping down the glass walls of a conference room when he heard footsteps approaching. He didn't look up. Looking up invited eye contact, and eye contact invited recognition. But the footsteps stopped. "Nathan?" The voice was tentative, surprised. He'd frozen, cloth in hand, staring at his own reflection in the glass. Slowly, he turned. Victoria Hale stood 15 feet away, a leather portfolio tucked under one arm. Her expression caught somewhere between shock and something that might have been discomfort. She looked exactly as he remembered, sharp-featured, impeccably dressed, her dark hair pulled back in a style that suggested control and confidence. But there was something different in her eyes, a flicker of something he couldn't quite name. "It's been a long time," she said. Nathan said nothing. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. "I didn't know you were—" She gestured vaguely at his uniform, the cart, the reality of what he'd become. "I didn't know you were working here, in this capacity." "I've been here for 2 years," Nathan said quietly. "You've walked past me 47 times. Her expression tightened. "I didn't recognize—" "People don't," Nathan interrupted, his tone flat. "That's the point." Another silence. Victoria shifted her weight, a rare tell of discomfort. "I've thought about what happened, about your case. I want you to know that I've—" "Do you?" Nathan asked, his voice soft but cutting through her words like a blade. "Do you think about it?" She blinked. "I'm sorry? Do you think about the fact that you fired me after a 20-minute review? That you destroyed my career, my reputation, and nearly cost me my home, all without ever asking me what actually happened?" Victoria's jaw tightened. The evidence was clear. The CFO presented a detailed report showing the evidence was falsified, Nathan said, still in that same quiet tone. "But you didn't care enough to verify it." "That's not fair," Victoria shot back, her composure cracking slightly. "I had a fiduciary responsibility. The documentation showed clear evidence of fraudulent transfers under your authorization. What was I supposed to do?" "Ask me," Nathan said simply. "You could have asked me." The words hung in the air between them. Victoria opened her mouth, then closed it again. For a moment, she looked like she wanted to say something else. But then her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and the moment shattered. "I have a board meeting," she said, her voice returning to its usual crisp efficiency. "But Nathan, are you still upset with me?" Nathan looked at her for a long moment. Then he picked up his cleaning cloth and turned back to the window. "Ask me when the room is empty." That conversation had replayed in Nathan's mind countless times over the past 6 weeks. He'd worked the same floors, moved through the same corridors, followed the same routines. But something had shifted. Victoria seemed to notice him now, not in an obvious way. She didn't stop to chat or seek him out. But there were moments when he'd catch her looking at him from across the lobby, or hesitating slightly when she passed him in a hallway, like she was seeing him for the first time in years. Like she was starting to wonder if she'd made a mistake. Nathan didn't know what to do with that. Part of him wanted to feel satisfaction, the grim pleasure of watching her squirm with potential guilt. But mostly, he felt tired. Tired of carrying the weight of what had happened. Tired of the anger that had nowhere to go. Because the truth was, Nathan had never been an angry person. Even when Richard Langley, the CFO who'd destroyed his life, had walked free while Nathan lost everything. Even when Victoria had signed the termination papers without a second thought. Even when he'd had to explain to a 7-year-old girl why they had to sell mommy's car and move to a smaller house. Even then, Anger had never been his dominant emotion. Disappointment, yes. Grief, absolutely. But anger required energy Nathan couldn't afford to spend. He'd learned that lesson the hard way. Nathan's wife, Elena, had died 2 years after he was fired from Orion Dynamics. A brain aneurysm, sudden, catastrophic, impossible to predict. One moment she was laughing at the kitchen table, helping 5-year-old Lily with a coloring book. The next moment she was gone. The doctor said she wouldn't have felt any pain. Nathan wasn't sure that made it better. Elena had been his anchor during the worst of the scandal. When the news broke that Nathan Cole, respected financial director at Orion Dynamics, had been terminated for fraud, the judgment was swift and brutal. Former colleagues stopped returning his calls. LinkedIn connections quietly disappeared. Job interviews that had seemed promising suddenly ended with vague promises to keep your resume on file. Nobody wanted to hire a man who'd been fired for financial misconduct, no matter how loudly he insisted it was a frame-up. Elena had never doubted him, not for a single second. "I know who you are," she told him one night, when he'd broken down after the 4th rejected job application. "I know what kind of man you are. The truth will come out eventually. Until then, we survive." She'd taken a second job as a weekend receptionist at a dental office. They'd cut every expense they could. They'd made it work. And then she died. Just like that. No warning, no chance to say goodbye. Lily had been too young to fully understand. She knew Mommy was gone, that she wasn't coming back, but the permanence of it hadn't settled in yet. She still sometimes talked about what they'd do when Mommy feels better. Nathan had learned to carry his grief silently, the way he carried everything else now. For Lily's sake. Always for Lily. "Daddy, why do you have to go to work when it's still dark?" Lily had asked him that question 3 weeks ago over breakfast. She'd been eating cereal, her legs swinging from the kitchen chair, her light brown hair still mussed from sleep. Nathan had paused, his coffee cup halfway to his lips. "Because that's when the building needs me," he said carefully. "I help make sure everything is clean and safe before people arrive for work." "But you used to work in an office," Lily said. She'd heard fragments of his old life from relatives, from neighbors, from conversations he'd thought were private. "Mrs. Chen said you used to wear a suit." Nathan set down his coffee cup. "I did," he said quietly. "But things changed." "Why?" The eternal question of childhood. Why? How could he explain it to a 7-year-old? How could he tell her that the world wasn't always fair, that good people sometimes got blamed for things they didn't do, that the truth didn't always win? "Sometimes grown-up work is complicated," he said finally, "but what I do now is important. And it means I can pick you up from school every day. That's more important to me than wearing a suit." Lily had considered this seriously, the way she considered everything. "Okay," she said, "but I think you'd look nice in a suit." Nathan had smiled despite himself. "Maybe someday, kiddo." But he didn't believe it, that life was over. This was his life now. Early mornings and late nights, cleaning floors he used to walk with confidence, keeping his head down and his daughter safe. It wasn't the life he'd planned, but it was the life he had. The executive corridor on the 14th floor was Nathan's least favorite assignment. Not because of the work itself. It was actually easier than the lower floors, less foot traffic, fewer messes to clean. But because every step down that hallway reminded him of who he used to be. His old office was now occupied by someone named Derek Huang, according to the nameplate. Nathan didn't know Derek Huang, didn't want to know him. It was easier to think of the office as belonging to a stranger than to remember the years he'd spent there. But the memories came anyway. He remembered the view from that office, the way the afternoon light would slant through the windows, casting long shadows across his desk. He remembered the specific creak of his desk chair. He remembered the photo he'd kept on his credenza, Elena and Lily at the beach, both of them laughing at something he'd said just before the shutter clicked. He'd had to leave that photo behind when security escorted him from the building. He wondered sometimes if it was still there, forgotten in a drawer, or if it had been thrown away with the rest of his professional life. Nathan shook off the thought and focused on his work. The conference room at the end of the hall needed attention. There'd been a late meeting yesterday, and the facilities request noted coffee stains on the table and scattered papers. He unlocked the door and wheeled his cart inside. The conference room was one of the larger ones, designed for board meetings and high-level presentations. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Elliott Bay, where ferries moved like slow ghosts through morning mist. The conference table was solid oak, surrounded by leather chairs that probably cost more than Nathan's monthly mortgage. He began cleaning methodically, wiping down the table, emptying trash bins, organizing abandoned coffee cups and water bottles. That's when he noticed the folder. It was sitting at the far end of the table, partially hidden beneath a stack of printed reports. A plain manila folder, unremarkable except for the fact that someone had left it behind. Nathan hesitated. In 3 years of working maintenance, he'd learned not to look at confidential documents. It wasn't his business. It wasn't his world anymore. But something about this folder caught his attention. Maybe it was the handwritten label on the tab. Q4 Financial Review. Confidential. Maybe it was the familiar format of the spreadsheets visible through the partially open folder. Maybe it was some instinct he'd thought he'd buried 3 years ago. Nathan glanced at the door. Still early. The corridor outside was empty. He opened the folder. What he saw made his blood run cold. The spreadsheets were formatted exactly the way he remembered. Columns of figures, account numbers, transfer records. But there was something wrong with them. Something that triggered the same alarm bells that had gone off in his mind 5 years ago. Irregular transfers between accounts, amounts that didn't match the stated purposes, authorization codes that appeared legitimate but didn't follow the standard pattern. Nathan's hands trembled slightly as he flipped through the pages. It was the same thing. The exact same pattern he'd discovered 5 years ago. The pattern he'd reported to Richard Langley, the CFO. The pattern that had somehow been twisted around to make him look like the criminal. And it was happening again. Someone was moving money through Orion Dynamics accounts using the same techniques, the same shell transactions, the same carefully constructed paper trail designed to look legitimate to casual inspection. But Nathan's inspection had never been casual. Even in his maintenance uniform, even after 5 years away from financial analysis, his mind still worked the same way. He could see the pattern like a 3-dimensional map, where the money came from, where it went, how it was disguised. And he could see something else, too. This wasn't a small operation anymore. The amounts involved dwarfed what he had discovered 5 years ago. Whoever was doing this had gotten bolder, more confident, more reckless. Nathan carefully photographed several pages with his phone, his heart hammering against his ribs. Then he closed the folder and placed it exactly where he'd found it. His mind was racing. What was he supposed to do with this information? Last time he'd reported financial irregularities to the CFO, he'd been fired and blacklisted from the industry. Last time he'd trusted the system to investigate properly, he'd lost everything. Why would this time be any different? And yet, he thought about the employees at Orion Dynamics. Good people, most of them. People with families and mortgages and lives that would be destroyed if the company went down because of fraud. He thought about the investors who trusted their money to Orion Dynamics management. He thought about Elena and what she would have said. The truth will come out eventually. But would it? Or would it be buried again the way his truth had been buried? Nathan left the conference room with the folder undisturbed, his cleaning cart squeaking softly down the empty hallway. He had no idea what he was going to do, but he knew one thing: he couldn't pretend he hadn't seen it. Not this time. The rest of Nathan's shift passed in a blur. He moved through his routine on autopilot, cleaning offices, emptying trash, wiping down surfaces, while his mind churned through possibilities. Go to the board? They'd never listen to a maintenance worker making accusations against their CFO. Go to the media? Without proof beyond a few photographs of internal documents, he'd just look like a disgruntled former employee seeking revenge. Go to Victoria? That thought stopped him cold. Victoria Hale, who had fired him without investigating. Victoria Hale, who had trusted Richard Langley's false report over Nathan's protests. Victoria Hale, who had the power to either expose this fraud or bury it even deeper. Could he trust her? Did he have any choice? Nathan was still wrestling with these questions when his shift ended at 1 p.m. He clocked out, changed into his street clothes in the basement locker room, and headed out to his car. The drive to Lily's school was familiar enough that he could do it without thinking. He pulled into the parent pickup lane at Greenwood Elementary at 2:45 p.m., exactly on time, and watched the doors for his daughter's face. When Lily emerged, backpack bouncing and braids flying, talking animatedly with her friend Mia, Nathan felt the knot in his chest loosen slightly. This was what mattered. This was what he was protecting. "Hi, Daddy." Lily threw herself into the back seat with the careless energy of childhood. "Guess what happened in math today?" "What happened?" Nathan asked, forcing his attention away from the images on his phone and back to his daughter's bright face. "Mr. Peterson said I got all my multiplication problems right. All of them. And he gave me a star sticker. Look." She thrust her hand toward him, showing off a silver star affixed to her palm. "That's amazing, kiddo," Nathan said, and he meant it. "I'm really proud of you. Can we get ice cream to celebrate?" Nathan glanced at the clock. Lily had swimming lessons at 4 p.m. They had just enough time. "Sure," he said, "but just a small cone, okay? We have swimming soon." "Okay." They stopped at the neighborhood ice cream shop, a tiny place with 3 flavors and tables that wobbled on uneven legs. Lily got mint chip. Nathan got black coffee. Watching his daughter devour her ice cream with single-minded focus, chocolate smudges accumulating around her mouth, Nathan felt the weight of his decision settling over him. Whatever he chose to do about what he'd discovered would affect her. It always affected her. If he spoke up and was ignored, or worse, retaliated against, he could lose this job. Then the second job wouldn't be enough to cover their expenses. They'd lose the house. Lily's stability, the careful routine he'd built to keep her life normal, would collapse. But if he stayed silent and the fraud brought down Orion Dynamics, hundreds of people would lose their jobs. The scandal would be massive, and Nathan would have to live with the knowledge that he'd seen it coming and done nothing. Elena's voice echoed in his memory. "I know what kind of man you are." What kind of man was he? Was he the kind who protected himself and his daughter above all else? Or was he the kind who did the right thing even when it was terrifying? "Daddy, you're not eating your coffee," Lily observed. Nathan blinked and looked down at his untouched cup. "Just thinking, kiddo," he said softly. "About what?" "About," he paused, "about doing something difficult." Lily tilted her head, considering this with the seriousness she brought to important questions. "Is it the right thing to do?" she asked. Nathan felt his throat tighten. "I think so," he said quietly. "But it's scary." Lily reached across the table and patted his hand with her ice cream sticky fingers. "Mommy used to say that being brave means doing scary things anyway," she said. Nathan stared at his 7-year-old daughter, feeling like the ground had shifted beneath him. "She did say that," he whispered. "She said that a lot." "So you should be brave," Lily concluded, returning her attention to her ice cream cone as if she hadn't just delivered the answer Nathan had been searching for. That night, after swimming lessons and dinner and bedtime stories, after Mrs. Chen had settled in for her usual evening shift and Lily's breathing had slowed into the rhythm of sleep, Nathan sat at his kitchen table with his phone. The photographs of the financial documents glowed on the screen. He'd made his decision. Tomorrow, he would find a way to speak to Victoria Hale privately. He would show her what he'd found. He would lay out the pattern, explain the irregularities, and give her the chance to investigate before the fraud grew any larger. And if she dismissed him again, well, at least he'd know he tried. Nathan sent a brief email to Victoria's assistant, a carefully worded request for a 5-minute meeting to discuss a time-sensitive facilities concern. It was vague enough not to raise red flags, but formal enough to potentially get on her calendar. He hit send before he could second-guess himself. Then he sat in the quiet kitchen, listening to the house settle around him, and waited for morning. Okay. The response came at 6:47 a.m., while Nathan was already halfway through his shift. "Ms. Hale has 15 minutes available at 8 a.m. if that works for your schedule." Nathan's heart hammered as he typed back, "That works. Thank you." He had an hour and 13 minutes to figure out what he was going to say. 63 minutes to plan how to convince the woman who'd destroyed his career that she needed to trust him now. 52 minutes to decide whether he was making the biggest mistake of his life or the bravest choice. Nathan finished his cleaning route in a daze, his mind rehearsing and discarding opening lines. By 7:55 a.m., he was standing outside Victoria's office on the 42nd floor, still wearing his maintenance uniform, holding his phone with the photographs that could change everything. The door opened. Victoria's assistant, a young woman named Jennifer, who'd always been polite to Nathan, gestured him inside. "Miss Hale is finishing a call," Jennifer said. "She'll be with you in just a moment." Nathan stepped into the outer office and waited. Through the partially open door to Victoria's private office, he could hear her voice, crisp, authoritative, discussing quarterly projections with someone on the phone. This was it. No turning back. The call ended. There was a brief pause. "Send him in," Victoria's voice called. Nathan took a breath and stepped through the doorway. Bom. Victoria's office was exactly what he would have expected. Spacious, minimalist, dominated by floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a commanding view of the Seattle skyline. The furniture was expensive but austere. A glass desk, modern chairs, abstract art that probably cost more than Nathan's annual salary. Victoria herself sat behind the desk, dressed in a charcoal suit, her expression neutral and professional. "Nathan," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her. "Please, sit. Jennifer said you needed to discuss a facilities concern?" Nathan remained standing. "That was the easiest way to get a meeting," he said quietly. "What I actually need to talk to you about is fraud." Victoria's expression didn't change, but he saw her spine straighten slightly. "I'm sorry?" Nathan pulled out his phone and opened the first photograph. "Yesterday, I was cleaning the large conference room on 14. Someone left a folder behind. Q4 financial review." He held up the phone so she could see the image. "These spreadsheets show irregular transfers between accounts. The same pattern I found 5 years ago. The same pattern I reported to Richard Langley before I was fired." Victoria's eyes flicked to the phone screen, then back to his face. "You looked at confidential financial documents?" "Yes," Nathan said simply. "I did." "That's a serious violation of—" "I know," Nathan interrupted, his voice level. "Fire me if you want. But look at the documents first. Really look at them." He set his phone on her desk and stepped back. Victoria hesitated for a long moment. Then she picked up the phone and began scrolling through the images. Nathan watched her face carefully. He saw the exact moment her professional mask cracked, a slight narrowing of her eyes, a barely perceptible intake of breath. She'd seen it. She recognized the pattern. "These transactions..." Victoria's voice was soft, almost to herself. "These authorization codes are falsified," Nathan finished. "Whoever's moving this money is using legitimate-looking routing, but the amounts don't match the stated purposes. And if you check the timing against market movements, you'll see someone's using insider information to make trades through subsidiary accounts." Victoria looked up at him sharply. "How do you know that?" "Because it's exactly what I found 5 years ago," Nathan said. "The pattern's the same, just bigger, bolder. And if I had to guess, it's been running continuously since I was fired, probably accelerating because whoever's doing it thinks they got away with it." The silence in the office was absolute. Victoria set down the phone carefully, as if it might explode. "When you reported irregularities 5 years ago," she said slowly, "you said you went to Richard Langley." "Yes. And he presented me with evidence that you had authorized the fraudulent transfers." "He forged my authorization," Nathan said. "He altered the original records I'd flagged and made it look like I was the one moving the money." "Do you have proof of that?" Nathan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small USB drive. "I saved the original files before I submitted my report to Langley," he said quietly. "Everything I'd flagged, all my analysis, time-stamped and backed up to a personal drive. I've kept it all these years. I wasn't sure why. Maybe I thought someone would eventually ask. Maybe I just needed to know the truth existed somewhere, even if no one believed it." He set the USB drive on her desk next to his phone. "It's all there," he said. "Compare my original analysis to the falsified report Langley showed you. The alterations are obvious once you know what to look for." Victoria stared at the USB drive like it was a live grenade. "If what you're saying is true," she said carefully, "if Richard Langley falsified evidence to frame you for fraud, he was committing himself." "Then he's still doing it," Nathan finished. "And whatever he's running now is big enough to take down this entire company when it unravels." Which it will. This kind of operation always unravels eventually. Victoria stood abruptly and walked to the window, her back to Nathan. For a long time, she said nothing. Nathan waited. Finally, she turned around. "Why are you bringing this to me?" she asked. "After what happened, after I—" She paused, seeming to struggle with the words. "After I destroyed your career without giving you a fair hearing, why would you trust me with this?" Nathan considered the question. "I don't trust you," he said honestly. "But you're the only person with enough authority to do something about this before it's too late. And despite everything," he paused, "I don't want to see this company collapse. There are good people here, people with families. They don't deserve to lose everything because of one man's greed." Victoria's jaw tightened. "If I investigate this," she said slowly, "and you're right, and Richard has been running a fraud scheme for 5 years right under my nose. Do you understand what that means for me? For my reputation? For my position?" "Yes," Nathan said. "I do." "And you're telling me anyway." "I'm telling you because it's the truth," Nathan said simply. "What you do with it is your choice." Another long silence. Then Victoria walked back to her desk and picked up her phone. "Cancel my 8:30, she said to Jennifer, "and my 9 o'clock. Clear my morning. I need to make some calls." She looked at Nathan. "I'm bringing in forensic auditors," she said. "Outside firm, no connection to Orion Dynamics. They'll need to interview you. Are you prepared for that?" Nathan felt something loosen in his chest, something that had been wound tight for 5 years. "Yes," he said. "This investigation will take time," Victoria continued. "Weeks, maybe months. If you're right about Richard, he'll fight back. Hard. It could get ugly." "I know." Victoria studied him for a moment longer. "I misjudged you," she said quietly. 5 years ago. I should have asked more questions. I should have listened." Nathan said nothing. What was there to say? An apology didn't undo 5 years of struggle. It didn't bring back the career he'd lost or the life he'd built. It didn't make Elena's death any less devastating or Lily's questions any easier to answer. But it was something. "Thank you for bringing this to me," Victoria said. "I know it wasn't easy." Nathan picked up his phone and the USB drive from her desk. "Do the right thing," he said quietly. "That's all I'm asking." Then he turned and walked out of her office, leaving Victoria Hale standing alone with the evidence that could bring down her company's CFO and vindicate the man she'd wrongly destroyed. Nathan took the elevator back down to the basement, changed into his street clothes, and drove to pick up Lily from school. His hands were shaking slightly on the steering wheel. He'd done it. He'd spoken up. Now all he could do was wait to see if the truth would finally matter. The investigation began quietly. Nathan knew it was happening. Victoria had told him the auditors would be in touch. But for 3 weeks, his life continued exactly as it had before. He worked his maintenance shift. He picked up Lily from school. He ate dinner at the small kitchen table and read bedtime stories and worked his overnight security job. Nothing changed, except everything had. Because now, when Nathan pushed his cart through the executive corridor at 5 a.m., he knew that somewhere in this building, forensic accountants were pulling apart every financial transaction from the past 5 years. Somewhere, people were reading the files he'd saved. Somewhere, the truth was finally being examined, and Richard Langley had no idea it was coming. Nathan tried not to think about it, tried not to imagine the moment when the CFO would be confronted with evidence of his fraud, tried not to hope too hard that justice might finally arrive. Hope, he'd learned, was dangerous. Hope could break you worse than despair ever could. But still, late at night when Lily was asleep and the house was quiet, Nathan would lie awake and think about what Victoria had said. "I misjudged you." 4 words that didn't fix anything, but somehow made breathing a little easier. On a Tuesday morning in the 4th week, Nathan was cleaning the lobby when he saw them. 3 people in dark suits, carrying briefcases, walking with the purposeful stride of law enforcement. They met with Victoria on the 42nd floor. 2 hours later, Richard Langley's office was sealed. By noon, the CFO had been escorted from the building by security. By the end of the day, every employee at Orion Dynamics knew that something major had happened, though only a handful knew what. Nathan heard about it through the facility's supervisor, who'd heard it from someone in HR, who'd heard it from someone in legal. The CFO was suspended pending investigation. The board had been notified. Federal regulators were involved. Nathan finished his shift and drove to Lily's school with his hands steady on the wheel and his heart beating like thunder. It was really happening. The truth was coming out. He didn't know yet if he'd be vindicated, didn't know if his name would be cleared or his reputation restored, but he knew one thing: he'd done the right thing. And whatever happened next, he could live with that. That evening, as Nathan was helping Lily with her homework at the kitchen table, his phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. Nathan Cole? The voice was professional, female. Speaking. This is Jennifer Chen from Victoria Hale's office. Ms. Hale would like to meet with you tomorrow. Would 4 p.m. work? There's a coffee shop near the office, Café Veloce on 3rd Avenue. She suggested somewhere more private than her office. Nathan's mind raced. 4 p.m. works, he heard himself say. Excellent. She'll see you there. The call ended. Nathan set down his phone and stared at it. Lily looked up from her math worksheet. Who was that? She asked. My boss, Nathan said slowly. She wants to talk to me. Are you in trouble? Nathan thought about that. I don't know, kiddo, he said honestly. But I guess we'll find out. Café Veloce was the kind of place that prided itself on being invisible. Tucked between a law office and a dry cleaner on 3rd Avenue, it had no flashy signage, no Instagram-worthy interior. Just honest coffee, worn wooden tables, and the kind of anonymity that made it perfect for conversations people didn't want overheard. Nathan arrived 10 minutes early, a habit from his old life that he'd never quite broken. He ordered black coffee from a barista who didn't look up from her phone and chose a table in the back corner, away from the windows. His maintenance uniform had been replaced by jeans and a button-down shirt, the closest thing to professional clothing he still owned. The shirt was a few years old, a little loose around the collar, but clean and pressed. He'd ironed it himself that morning while Lily ate cereal and asked why he was dressing fancy. Just a meeting, he'd told her. With who? Someone from work. Lily had squinted at him with that unnerving perception children sometimes possessed. You look nervous. Nathan had smiled and kissed the top of her head. Maybe a little. Now, sitting in the cafe with his coffee cooling in front of him, Nathan realized a little nervous had been a massive understatement. His heart was doing complicated gymnastics in his chest. His palms were damp. Every time the door opened, he tensed. At 4:03 p.m., Victoria Hale walked in. She was dressed differently than he'd ever seen her. No power suit, no severe styling. She wore dark slacks and a cream-colored sweater, her hair down instead of pulled back. She looked tired, human. Nothing like the ice queen the employees whispered about. She spotted Nathan immediately and walked over, carrying her own coffee. Thank you for coming, she said, sitting down across from him without preamble. You asked, Nathan replied simply. Victoria set her cup down carefully, then folded her hands on the table. For a moment, she just looked at him. Really looked at him. Not the maintenance worker she'd walked past 47 times, but the man she'd once fired. The forensic audit confirmed everything, she said finally. Every single thing you said. Richard Langley has been running a sophisticated fraud scheme for at least 6 years. Probably longer. The auditors are still tracing the full scope, but current estimates put the misappropriated funds at over $8 million. Nathan felt the words land like physical blows. $8 million. He'd known it was bad, but hearing the number made it real in a way the spreadsheets hadn't. Your original report, Victoria continued, the one you filed 6 weeks before you were terminated, the auditors found it in the archived servers. It detailed every irregularity you'd discovered. It was thorough, professional, and absolutely correct. She paused. Richard systematically altered every piece of evidence you'd flagged. He created false authorization trails using your credentials. He built an entire false narrative to make you look guilty. I know, Nathan said quietly. I lived it. Victoria flinched slightly. Yes, you did. She took a breath. The board met this morning. Richard has been terminated. The U.S. Attorney's Office has been notified. Criminal charges are being filed. He'll likely face federal prosecution for wire fraud, securities fraud, and a dozen other charges the lawyers are still compiling. Nathan absorbed this information. He'd imagined this moment countless times over the past 5 years, the moment when Richard Langley would finally face consequences for what he'd done. But now that it was here, Nathan didn't feel the rush of satisfaction he'd expected. He just felt hollow. What about the employees, he asked. The people who had nothing to do with this? The company will survive, Victoria said. The fraud was sophisticated, but it was contained to specific accounts. Our core business is sound. There'll be some turbulence, media coverage, investor concerns, probably a few lawsuits, but we'll get through it. She met his eyes, largely because you caught it before it metastasized into something truly catastrophic. Nathan said nothing. Victoria reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. She set it on the table between them. This is an official letter from Orion Dynamics Board of Directors, she said. It states that your termination 5 years ago was made in error based on falsified evidence. It clears your record completely. Your personnel file has been corrected to reflect that you were not terminated for cause. We're also prepared to provide letters of recommendation, professional references, whatever you need to rebuild your career in finance. Nathan stared at the folder without touching it. There's also a settlement offer, Victoria continued. The board recognizes that you suffered significant financial and reputational harm due to Richard's fraud and our failure to investigate properly. We're prepared to offer compensation for lost wages, legal fees, and damages. She named a figure that made Nathan's breath catch. It was more money than he'd make in 3 years at both his current jobs combined. You'd have to sign a non-disclosure agreement, Victoria added. Standard confidentiality terms. You wouldn't be able to discuss the specifics of the settlement or the internal investigation publicly. Nathan finally looked up from the folder. You want to buy my silence, he said flatly. No, Victoria said sharply. I want to make things right, or as right as they can be made given the circumstances. The NDA is standard legal protection for the company. But Nathan, she leaned forward slightly, you have no obligation to accept any of this. You can reject the settlement, hire a lawyer, sue us for wrongful termination, and everything that followed. You'd probably win. You'd probably get more than we're offering. Then why the settlement? Because lawsuits take years, Victoria said bluntly, and they're ugly. They drag you through depositions and testimony and media coverage. They'd force you to relive the worst period of your life over and over for the entertainment of lawyers and journalists. I'm offering you a way to close this chapter and move forward. She paused. But more than that, I'm offering you something else. She reached into her bag again and pulled out a second document. This is a formal job offer, she said. Director of Financial Oversight and Integrity. It's a new position, created specifically in response to this crisis. You would report directly to me and the board. Your job would be to implement controls and oversight processes to ensure nothing like Richard's fraud can happen again. You'd have authority to audit any department, review any account, investigate any irregularity, no exceptions, no political protection for executives, full autonomy. Nathan felt the room tilt slightly. You want to hire me back, he said slowly. Yes. After 5 years. Yes. Oh, after destroying my career and forcing me to work 2 jobs just to keep my house. Victoria's composure cracked for the first time. I know what I did to you, Nathan. I know I can't undo it. This offer isn't about absolution. It's about recognizing that you were right when everyone else was wrong. You had the integrity to report fraud even when it cost you everything. That's exactly the kind of person who should be in a position of oversight. She paused. The board agrees. I agree. The question is whether you can forgive us enough to come back. Nathan sat back in his chair, his mind reeling. This was everything he'd lost, everything he'd grieved for. His career, his reputation, his professional identity, all of it being offered back to him in 2 manila folders. I need to think about it, he heard himself say. Of course, Victoria said immediately. Take whatever time you need. There's no pressure, no deadline. Read through everything, consult a lawyer if you want. This is your decision, Nathan. Entirely yours. She stood, leaving the folders on the table. For what it's worth, she said quietly, I'm deeply sorry for not listening, for not investigating, for letting Richard destroy you while I remained willfully blind. I've spent the last 3 weeks reviewing every decision I made during that period, and I have no excuse. I failed you. The company failed you, and I will regret that for the rest of my career." Nathan looked up at her. The great Victoria Hale, the Ice Queen, standing in a shabby cafe apologizing to a maintenance worker. A month ago, he would have given anything to hear these words. Now he didn't know what to feel. "I appreciate you telling me," he said finally. Victoria nodded once, then walked out of the cafe, leaving Nathan alone with 2 folders that could change his life for the second time. He sat there for a long time, coffee going cold, staring at the documents he couldn't quite bring himself to open. Finally, he picked up the folders, walked out to his car, and drove to pick up Lily. The drive passed in a blur of traffic lights and half-formed thoughts. By the time he pulled into the school pickup lane, he'd made no decisions except one. He wasn't going to open those folders until Lily was asleep. Whatever they contained, whatever choice they demanded, it could wait a few more hours. Lily bounced into the car with her usual explosion of energy, talking about a science project on volcanoes, and how her friend Mia had brought in a geode for show and tell. "Can we get a geode, Dad? They're so cool. They're like regular rocks on the outside, but then you crack them open and they're all sparkly inside." "Maybe for your birthday," Nathan said, his voice operating on autopilot while his brain churned through impossible scenarios. "My birthday's not for 6 months, Lily protested. "Then you have 6 months to drop hints," Nathan said, managing a smile. They stopped for groceries on the way home. Lily insisted they needed ingredients for chocolate chip cookies, a request Nathan didn't have the energy to deny. At home, they made an absolute mess of the kitchen. Flour ended up on the floor. Chocolate chips were consumed at an alarming rate before making it into the dough, and Lily got cookie batter in her hair somehow. But the chaos was grounding, normal, real. While the cookies baked, filling the house with the smell of vanilla and melting chocolate, Lily sat at the kitchen table working on her homework and Nathan washed dishes, the folders sitting on the counter like unexploded ordnance. "Dad?" Lily said suddenly. "Yeah, kiddo. Are you okay? You've been quiet." Nathan turned off the water and dried his hands. 7 years old, and she could already read him like a book. "I'm okay," he said, "just thinking about some grown-up stuff." "Is it about your meeting?" "Yeah." Lily considered this. "Did something bad happen?" "No," Nathan said slowly. "Actually, something good happened. Maybe. I'm just trying to figure out what to do about it." What kind of good thing? How could he explain it to her? How could he tell a 7-year-old that the job he'd lost before she was old enough to remember had just been offered back to him, along with a pile of money and an apology that came 5 years too late? "Remember how I told you I used to work in an office?" Nathan said carefully. "Yeah. Well, the people at that office said they made a mistake when they let me go. They want me to come back and work there again." Lily's face lit up. "That's great. Does that mean you won't have to wake up so early anymore?" Nathan felt something twist in his chest. Of course that's what she'd think about. Not the prestige or the salary or the validation, just the simple fact that maybe her dad wouldn't have to leave before dawn anymore. "Maybe," he said, "but it's complicated. I have to think about whether it's the right choice for us." "Why wouldn't it be?" "Because—" Nathan paused, trying to find words for the tangle of feelings in his chest. "Because the last time I worked there, some bad things happened. And I'm not sure if I want to go back to a place that has those memories." Lily thought about this with the gravity she brought to important questions. "Mommy used to say that sometimes the best way to make bad memories better is to make new good ones in the same place," she said. Nathan's breath caught. "She said that?" "Yeah, when I didn't want to go back to the park after I fell off the swings and scraped my knee. She said if I only remembered the park as the place where I got hurt, I'd never get to have fun there again. So we went back and I went down the slide 100 times, and now when I think about that park, I mostly remember the slide." Nathan crossed the room and pulled his daughter into a hug, cookies and homework forgotten. "When did you get so smart?" he murmured into her hair. "I've always been smart," Lily said matter-of-factly. "You just noticed?" Nathan laughed despite himself, and for the first time since walking out of the cafe, some of the tension in his chest loosened. That night, after cookies and dinner and a bath that somehow resulted in more water on the bathroom floor than in the tub, After stories and songs and the elaborate bedtime routine that Lily insisted upon, Nathan finally sat down at the kitchen table with the two folders. Mrs. Chen was in her usual spot on the couch, knitting something that might become a scarf or might become a very small blanket. It was hard to tell with Mrs. Chen's projects. "Big decision?" she asked without looking up from her needles. "Something like that," Nathan said. "The girl said something about your old job." "She talks too much," Nathan said without heat. "She talks exactly the right amount," Mrs. Chen corrected. "Children always do. We're the ones who stop listening." Nathan smiled faintly and opened the first folder. The settlement agreement was written in dense legal language, but the core terms were clear enough. Orion Dynamics acknowledged wrongful termination based on falsified evidence. They offered a lump sum payment for damages, lost wages calculated across 5 years, and full restoration of his professional reputation. In exchange, Nathan would agree not to pursue further legal action and to maintain confidentiality about the settlement terms and the internal investigation. It was generous, more than generous. With this money, he could pay off the mortgage, set up a college fund for Lily, stop working himself into the ground with 2 jobs, maybe even take a vacation, something they hadn't done since Elena died. He set that folder aside and opened the second one. The job offer was equally detailed. Director of Financial Oversight and Integrity. Salary that was 30% higher than what he'd been making as financial director 5 years ago. Full benefits, 401k matching, stock options. Reporting structure that gave him direct access to the CEO and the board with no intermediary management to filter his findings. On paper, it was everything he could want. But paper didn't capture what it would feel like to walk back into that building as an employee instead of a maintenance worker. Paper didn't reflect the weight of sitting in meetings with people who might remember him being escorted out by security. Paper couldn't measure the cost of reopening wounds he'd worked so hard to let scar over. Nathan read through both documents twice, then set them on the table and stared at the ceiling. The money alone would change Lily's life. He could give her opportunities he'd only dreamed about: better schools, music lessons, sports programs, college without crushing debt. But the job meant something different. It meant going back to who he used to be, or trying to. It meant trusting that this time would be different, that Victoria meant what she said about autonomy and authority. It meant believing that the system that had failed him once wouldn't fail him again. It meant having faith in something Nathan wasn't sure he had faith in anymore. "You're thinking too hard," Mrs. Chen observed from the couch. "I can hear your brain working from over here." "How do you know when to trust someone who's broken your trust before?" Nathan asked. Mrs. Chen's needles paused. "Are we talking about the job or something else?" "The job. My old boss wants me back. She's apologized, she's offering compensation, but she's also the person who fired me without asking questions 5 years ago." Mrs. Chen resumed knitting. "My husband cheated on me," she said casually. Nathan blinked at the non sequitur. "I didn't know that." "It was a long time ago. 30 years, maybe more. We were young, stupid. He had an affair with a woman from his work." She shrugged. "I found out. Almost left him. Packed a suitcase and everything." "What made you stay?" "He cried," Mrs. Chen said simply. "Not the fake crying men do when they're caught. Real crying. The kind that comes from knowing you've destroyed something precious. And then he spent the next 5 years proving that he understood what he'd done. Not with words. Words are cheap. With actions. Small things. Every day. Making my coffee the way I liked it. Remembering my mother's birthday. Being where he said he'd be, when he said he'd be there. Trust isn't rebuilt with grand gestures, Nathan. It's rebuilt with consistency." Nathan considered this. "So you're saying I should take the job?" "I'm saying that woman offered you money and an apology, but that's not trust. That's compensation. Trust would be her proving, day after day, that this time is different. And you won't know if she can do that unless you give her the chance." Mrs. Chen looked up from her knitting, her dark eyes sharp. "But here's the thing nobody tells you about forgiveness. You don't do it for the other person. You do it for yourself. Because carrying that anger, that betrayal, it's heavy. And you've been carrying it for 5 years while working 2 jobs and raising a daughter alone. Maybe it's time to put it down." Nathan felt something shift in his chest. Not certainty exactly, but something like permission. What if I fail? He asked quietly. What if I go back and can't do the job anymore? What if I've been out of finance too long, or I've lost whatever edge I had? Then you'll figure something else out, Mrs. Chen said. Same as you did when they fired you, same as you did when Elena died. You're not afraid of failing, Nathan. You're afraid of hoping, because hope means you might get hurt again. The truth of it hit him like a physical blow. She was right. He'd spent 5 years teaching himself not to hope for anything beyond the next paycheck, the next day of stability, the next small victory of keeping Lily's life normal. Hope for anything bigger, for justice, for vindication, for a second chance, had felt like inviting disaster. But Lily's words echoed in his mind. Sometimes the best way to make bad memories better is to make new good ones in the same place. Maybe it was time to risk hoping again. I'm going to sleep on it, Nathan said finally. Make a decision in the morning. Smart, Mrs. Chen said, returning her attention to her knitting. Night makes everything seem bigger than it is. Morning has a way of showing you what actually matters. Nathan gathered up the folders and went to check on Lily one more time before bed. She was sprawled across her mattress in that boneless way children slept, one arm flung over her favorite stuffed rabbit, her mouth slightly open. The nightlight cast soft shadows across her face. She looked peaceful, safe. Everything Nathan did was to keep her this way. He bent and kissed her forehead gently, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. I'm trying to do the right thing, kiddo, he whispered, for both of us. Lily didn't wake, but she smiled slightly in her sleep as if she'd heard him anyway. Nathan went to his own room, set the folders on his nightstand, and lay down in the darkness. Sleep didn't come easily. His mind kept circling the same questions, the same fears, the same impossible calculations of risk versus reward. But somewhere around 2 a.m., as he lay staring at the ceiling and listening to the house settle around him, Nathan realized something. He'd already made his decision. He'd made it the moment he photographed those financial documents instead of walking away. He'd made it when he emailed Victoria's assistant asking for a meeting. He'd made it every time over the past 5 years when he'd chosen to keep living, keep fighting, keep showing up for his daughter, even when everything felt impossible. He'd already chosen to believe that the truth mattered. Now he just had to choose to believe that he mattered too, that he deserved this second chance, that his skills and his integrity and his dogged refusal to give up had value. Nathan closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, let himself imagine walking back into Orion Dynamics, not as someone invisible, but as someone seen. Someone who belonged there. Someone who had earned his place. The image didn't feel as foreign as he'd expected. When morning came, Nathan woke to find Lily sitting on the edge of his bed, still in her pajamas, watching him with those serious brown eyes that were so much like Elena's. "Did you decide?" she asked. Nathan sat up, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "How did you know I had to decide something?" "Because you made that face you make when you're thinking really hard about something important, the one where your eyebrows do the thing." She demonstrated, scrunching her face into an exaggerated expression of concentration. Nathan laughed and pulled her into a hug. "Yeah, kiddo, I decided." "What did you decide?" "I decided," Nathan took a breath. "I decided that maybe it's time to stop being scared and start being brave. Like Mommy said." Lily pulled back to look at him. "So you're taking the job?" "I think I am," Nathan said. "If it doesn't work out, we'll figure something else out. But I think I have to try." Lily threw her arms around his neck. "I'm proud of you, Daddy." Nathan felt tears prick his eyes. "Yeah? Why's that?" "Because being brave is hard," Lily said seriously. "But you're doing it anyway." Nathan held his daughter close and thought about Elena, who would have loved to see this moment. Who would have told him exactly what Mrs. Chen had told him, that carrying the weight of betrayal for 5 years was long enough, that it was okay to hope again. That second chances, however they came, were still chances worth taking. "Okay," he said quietly, as much to himself as to Lily. "Okay, let's do this." Later that morning, after Lily was at school and Mrs. Chen had gone home and the house was quiet, Nathan sat down at his kitchen table with his phone. He pulled up Victoria's number. Jennifer had included it in the meeting confirmation email and typed out a message before he could second-guess himself. "I've reviewed the offers. I'd like to discuss the terms, but I'm interested in moving forward." When can we meet? He hit send before fear could change his mind. The response came within 5 minutes. I'm glad to hear it. Are you available this afternoon? 2 p.m., my office? Nathan stared at the message. This afternoon. In less than 4 hours, he'd be sitting in Victoria Hale's office, not as a maintenance worker or a supplicant, but as someone negotiating the terms of his return. The thought was terrifying. It was also exhilarating. I'll be there, he typed back. Then Nathan stood up, walked to his closet, and pulled out the one suit he'd kept from his old life. It was 5 years out of style and a little loose from the weight he'd lost, but it was professional and clean and would serve its purpose. He had 3.5 hours to prepare for a meeting that would determine the shape of his future. 3.5 hours to figure out what he wanted to say, what conditions he needed, what boundaries he had to set to make this work. 3.5 hours to transform himself from Nathan Cole, maintenance worker and survivor, back into Nathan Cole, financial director and guardian of truth. It felt impossible. It felt necessary. Nathan laid the suit out on his bed, made himself a pot of coffee, and started making notes. If he was going to do this, he was going to do it right. No more being invisible. No more accepting whatever scraps the world offered. This time, he would walk into that office knowing his worth, and he would make damn sure Victoria Hale knew it too. The suit fit differently than Nathan remembered. Not badly, exactly, just differently. The shoulders were still right, the sleeves hit at the proper length, but there was a looseness around the waist that spoke to 5 years of skipped meals and physical labor that had leaned him out in ways a desk job never had. He stood in front of the bathroom mirror, adjusting his tie for the 3rd time, and barely recognized the man staring back at him. This version of Nathan Cole looked like someone who belonged in a boardroom, like someone who made decisions that mattered, like someone who hadn't spent the last 3 years pushing a mop cart through marble hallways while the world pretended he didn't exist. The dissonance was almost painful. He checked his watch. 1:15. He needed to leave in 10 minutes to make the meeting on time, accounting for downtown traffic and the walk from the parking garage to Orion Dynamics Tower. His notes were folded in his jacket pocket. 3 pages of conditions, questions, and non-negotiables that he'd spent the morning refining. Nathan took one last look in the mirror, straightened his shoulders, and walked out to his car. The drive downtown felt surreal, like he was watching himself from outside his body. He'd made this drive thousands of times over the past 3 years, but always in the pre-dawn darkness, always in his work uniform, always as someone the building barely acknowledged. Now he was driving in broad daylight, dressed like he used to be, heading to a meeting that could reshape everything. His hands were steady on the wheel, but his heart was doing acrobatics. The parking garage attendant, a guy named Marcus who Nathan had exchanged maybe 10 words with over 3 years, did a visible double take when Nathan pulled up. "Cole? That you, man?" "Yeah," Nathan said, taking his ticket. "Damn, looking sharp. Job interview?" Something like that, Nathan thought. "Something like that," he said aloud. Marcus grinned. "Go get him." Nathan parked on the 3rd level, gathered his notes, and took the elevator down to the sky bridge that connected the garage to the main tower. His reflection in the elevator's mirrored walls showed a man who looked calm, composed, professional. The reflection lied beautifully. The lobby of Orion Dynamics looked different at 2 in the afternoon. Instead of empty silence and humming lights, it was full of people. Executives on phones, couriers with packages, clusters of employees heading back from lunch. Nathan walked through it all with his head up, his stride purposeful, and felt dozens of eyes slide over him without recognition. To them, he was just another businessman in a suit. The irony wasn't lost on him. He took the elevator to the 42nd floor, where Victoria's office occupied a corner with views that probably added 6 figures to the real estate value. Jennifer, the assistant, looked up from her desk as he approached. "Mr. Cole," she said with a warm smile. "Right on time. Miss Hale is expecting you." Nathan nodded his thanks and followed her gesture toward the partially open door. Victoria was standing at her window, silhouetted against the Seattle skyline, her phone pressed to her ear. She turned when she heard him enter, held up one finger in a just a moment gesture, and wrapped up her call with the efficiency of someone who'd mastered the art of ending conversations. "I understand. Keep me posted on any developments." She ended the call and set the phone on her desk. "Nathan, thank you for coming. She gestured to the small conference table near the window. Not the formal desk setup, Nathan noted. A subtle signal that this was meant to be a conversation between equals, not a boss dictating terms to an employee. "Please sit," Victoria said, taking a seat across from him. She'd changed since their coffee shop meeting, back in her armor of a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, hair pulled back, every inch the CEO. But something in her eyes was different, less certain, maybe, or perhaps just more careful. Nathan sat and pulled out his notes. Victoria noticed the gesture. "You came prepared." "I learned a long time ago not to go into important meetings without knowing what I want," Nathan said evenly. "Fair enough." Victoria folded her hands on the table. "I assume you have questions about the offers." "Several," Nathan said. He unfolded his first page of notes. "Let's start with the settlement. The amount is generous, but the NDA concerns me. I understand the need for confidentiality about company financials, but I want to be clear about what I'm agreeing not to discuss. Can I tell my daughter why we suddenly have more money? Can I explain to the people who helped me through the past 5 years what actually happened? Or am I signing away the right to tell my own story?" Victoria leaned back slightly. "The NDA is specifically about settlement terms and details of the internal investigation. You're not prohibited from discussing your termination or the fact that you were exonerated. You can tell people you were wrongfully fired and that the company has acknowledged the error. What you can't do is discuss the specific dollar amount of the settlement or reveal confidential details about how Richard's fraud scheme operated. Does that address your concern?" "Partially," Nathan said. "I want that language revised to explicitly state that I can discuss my personal experience, including my termination and exoneration, with family, close friends, and future employers. I won't discuss settlement figures or proprietary information, but I'm not going to lie about what happened to me." Victoria nodded slowly. "I can have legal revise the language to reflect that." "What else?" Nathan consulted his notes. "The settlement includes compensation for lost wages, but it's calculated based on my director-level salary frozen at what I was making 5 years ago. Inflation alone means that number is undervalued. I want the calculation adjusted to account for what I would likely be earning now if I'd remained employed and received normal merit increases and cost of living adjustments." "That's reasonable," Victoria said without hesitation. "I'll have finance run those numbers." Nathan felt a small surge of something that might have been confidence. She wasn't fighting him. She was listening. Actually, listening. "The job offer," he continued, moving to his second page. "Director of Financial Oversight and Integrity. I want to understand the reporting structure in detail. You say I report directly to you and the board, but what does that mean in practice? Can you overrule my findings? Can other executives block my investigations? What happens if I uncover something that implicates board members or senior leadership?" Victoria met his eyes. Those are exactly the right questions to ask. She reached for a folder on her desk and pulled out an organizational chart. "Here's what we're proposing. You would have dual reporting, to me as CEO and to the board's audit committee. Any investigation you initiate would be conducted independently. You'd have authority to engage external auditors or forensic specialists as needed, with budget approval required only for expenditures over $50,000. Your findings would be reported simultaneously to me and the audit committee in writing. Neither I nor any other executive could suppress or alter your reports." "What if your interests and the truth conflict?" Nathan asked bluntly. Victoria didn't flinch. "Then the truth wins." "That's the whole point of this position, Nathan. We failed catastrophically because we had inadequate oversight and because people like Richard could manipulate the system. The board is deadly serious about preventing that from happening again. They want someone in this role who can't be bullied, bought, or intimidated. Someone with a proven track record of putting integrity over career advancement." She paused. "Someone exactly like you." Nathan studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation or hidden agendas. All he saw was a woman who looked tired and determined in equal measure. "If I take this job," Nathan said carefully, "there will be people in this building who remember me being escorted out by security, who believe I committed fraud, who will resent my return or question my authority. How do you plan to handle that?" "With transparency," Victoria said immediately. "When we announce your hiring, we'll also announce the results of the forensic audit. The exoneration won't be buried in HR files. It'll be public, at least within the company. Employees will know that you were wrongfully terminated, that Richard Langley was the actual criminal, and that you're returning in a position of significant authority because you earned it. She leaned forward. Will some people still hold grudges or harbor doubts? Probably. But I'm not going to let you walk back into this building under a cloud of suspicion. If you come back with your reputation fully restored and my complete support. Nathan felt something tight in his chest loosen slightly. I appreciate that. What else? Victoria asked. Nathan looked down at his notes. The next item was harder to articulate, but it was non-negotiable. My daughter comes first, he said quietly. Always. I need schedule flexibility for her school events, medical appointments, emergencies. I need to be able to pick her up from school most days. I can't go back to the kind of schedule where I'm married to the job and absent from her life. If that's incompatible with this role, we should know now. Victoria's expression softened almost imperceptibly. I understand, and for what it's worth, I think that's exactly the right priority. She pulled out another document. I took the liberty of including flexible work provisions in the offer. Core hours are 9 to 3, with the understanding that you may need to arrive late or leave early for family obligations. You'd have the option to work remotely as needed. We can build your schedule around Lily's needs. Nathan stared at her. You remembered her name. Of course I remembered her name, Victoria said. Nathan, I'm not trying to hire you back as some kind of corporate penance project. I'm trying to hire you back because you're the right person for a critical job, and because I recognize that you have a life outside these walls that matters more than any position I could offer you. If we can't accommodate both, then we haven't actually made this right. For the first time since walking into the office, Nathan felt his careful control waver. This woman had destroyed his career with a 20-minute review and no follow-up questions. She'd cost him years of his life, his reputation, and countless opportunities. He should hate her. But sitting here, watching her actively work to address every concern he raised, Nathan found that hate was harder to hold on to than he'd expected. There's one more thing, he said, his voice rougher than intended. I need to know what happened, not the fraud. I understand that part. I need to know what happened with you. 5 years ago, when Richard showed you that falsified report, what was going through your mind? Why didn't you question it? Why didn't you talk to me? Victoria was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was careful but honest. I was arrogant, she said. I'd just been promoted to CFO. I was the youngest person to hold that position in the company's history, and I felt like I had something to prove. When Richard brought me evidence of fraud, my first thought wasn't, is this true? It was, how do I handle this decisively to show I'm in command? She looked down at her hands. You were well-liked, respected. Firing you for fraud would send a message that I was willing to make hard calls, that no one was above accountability. It would establish my authority. Nathan felt anger flare in his chest, hot and sharp. So I was a political sacrifice, he said flatly. Yes, Victoria said, meeting his eyes. And I've regretted it every day since. Not because of the consequences for me, though those are significant, but because I destroyed an innocent man's life to advance my own career. That's not leadership. That's cowardice dressed up as decisiveness. She paused. I can't undo it, Nathan. I can't give you back those 5 years. But I can tell you that I've learned from it. I've changed how I operate. I question more. I investigate deeper. I don't trust that the easy answer is the right answer. She gestured to the folders on the table. And I can offer you these for whatever they're worth. Nathan sat with the anger for a moment, let it burn through him, then slowly let it go. Holding on to it wouldn't change the past. It would only poison whatever future he chose to build. Okay, he said finally. Here's what I need. The settlement calculations revised to account for wage growth. The NDA language clarified to permit discussing my personal experience. A written guarantee of schedule flexibility for family obligations. And one more thing. Name it, Victoria said. I want quarterly meetings with you and the audit committee where I report on the health of our financial controls and any concerns I've identified, not just crisis meetings when something goes wrong. Regular check-ins where oversight is treated as a priority, not an afterthought. I want this role to matter structurally, not just symbolically. Victoria extended her hand across the table. You have my word. I'll have legal draft revised agreements incorporating everything we've discussed. You'll have them by end of week for your review. Nathan looked at her hand for a moment, then shook it. The gesture felt monumental and insufficient all at once. When would you want me to start? He asked. That's up to you, Victoria said. We need to announce the audit results and Richard's termination publicly within the next 2 weeks. I'd like to announce your hiring at the same time. Show that we're not just removing the problem, but installing someone with the integrity to prevent it from happening again. But if you need more time to transition out of your current positions, we can work around that. Nathan thought about his maintenance job, his overnight security shift, the careful routines that had structured his life for 3 years. I'll need to give proper notice, he said. 2 weeks for the maintenance position, same for the security job. I'm not going to leave them short-staffed just because I got a better offer. Victoria smiled slightly. That sounds exactly like something you'd say. She stood, and Nathan rose with her. I'll have Jennifer coordinate the logistics. In the meantime, if you have any other questions or concerns, call me directly. We're in this together now. Nathan nodded and turned to leave, then paused at the door. Victoria? She looked up from gathering her papers. Thank you, Nathan said. For listening. For actually listening this time. Victoria's expression was difficult to read. I should have done it 5 years ago. Better late than catastrophically too late. Nathan left her office with his notes in one hand and a strange sense of unreality settling over him. He'd gone into that meeting expecting a fight, expecting to have to battle for every concession. Instead, Victoria had met him more than halfway on every point. It should have felt like a victory. Instead, it felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, trying to decide whether the other side was close enough to jump to. He took the elevator back down to the lobby, walked through the afternoon crowds, and made it all the way to his car before the shaking started. Nathan sat in the driver's seat, hands trembling on the steering wheel, and let himself feel the full weight of what he'd just agreed to. He was going back. Back to the building where he'd been humiliated. Back to the career he'd thought was dead. Back to a life that looked, from the outside, like the one he'd lost. But it wasn't the same life. He wasn't the same man, and maybe that was the point. Nathan pulled out his phone and sent a text to Mrs. Chen. I took the job. Start date in 3 weeks. Her response came within seconds. Good. About damn time. Lily will be thrilled. I'll make dumplings to celebrate. Nathan smiled despite the anxiety coiling in his gut, started the car, and drove to pick up his daughter from school. When Lily bounced into the back seat, she took one look at him and grinned. You did it, she said. You took the job. I can tell. How can you tell? Nathan asked. Because you're wearing the suit, and you have that look on your face like when I do something brave and you're proud, but also a little scared for me. Nathan laughed and reached back to squeeze her hand. You're too smart for your own good, you know that? Mommy said the same thing, Lily said cheerfully. So what happens now? Now, Nathan said, pulling out of the school parking lot. I give notice at my current jobs. I work the next 3 weeks, and then I start over. That sounds scary, Lily observed. It is scary, Nathan admitted, but sometimes scary things are also the right things. Like going back to the park after falling off the swings, Lily said. Exactly like that. They stopped for ice cream on the way home. A celebration, Lily insisted, and Nathan didn't have the heart to argue. He watched his daughter attack a cone of mint chocolate chip with the single-minded focus of childhood and tried to imagine what life would look like in a month. No more 4:45 a.m. starts. No more overnight security shifts. No more living on the edge of financial disaster, one unexpected expense away from catastrophe. Instead, regular hours, professional work, a salary that would let him breathe for the first time in 5 years. It should have felt entirely positive, but Nathan couldn't shake the whisper of doubt at the back of his mind. What if he'd forgotten how to do this work? What if 5 years away had dulled his skills beyond recovery? What if he walked back into Orion Dynamics and proved that Victoria's faith in him was misplaced? Dad? Lily's voice cut through his spiraling thoughts. You're doing the face again. What face? The thinking too hard face. The one where you worry about stuff that hasn't happened yet. Nathan blinked at his 7-year-old daughter. When did you become a mind reader? I'm not reading your mind, Lily said with exaggerated patience. I'm reading your face. It's different. Nathan reached across the table and ruffled her hair. Eat your ice cream, smarty pants. You didn't answer my question, Lily persisted. Are you worried about the new job? Nathan considered lying, then decided Lily deserved better. A little bit, yeah. Why? Because I haven't done this kind of work in a long time. What if I'm not good at it anymore? Lily thought about this seriously. Do you remember how to ride a bike? What? Do you remember how to ride a bike? She repeated. Like, if you got on a bike right now, could you ride it? Probably, Nathan said, confused by the direction of the conversation. Well, you haven't ridden a bike in forever, but you still know how, right? Because once you learn something really well, you don't really forget it. You just get a little wobbly at first. Lily took another bite of ice cream. I bet working in an office is like that. You might be wobbly for a bit, but you'll remember. Nathan stared at his daughter, feeling something warm and painful expand in his chest. You know what? He said quietly. I bet you're right. That evening, after dinner and homework and the usual bedtime routine, Nathan sat down at his laptop and composed 2 resignation letters. The first was to his facility supervisor at Orion Dynamics, explaining that he was transitioning to a different position within the company and would work his final maintenance shift 2 weeks from Friday. The second was to the warehouse security company, thanking them for 3 years of steady employment and providing the same 2-week notice. Typing the words felt surreal. These jobs had been his lifeline, his stability, his proof that he could still provide for Lily even when the world tried to knock him down. Letting them go felt like cutting safety lines without knowing if there was solid ground beneath his feet. But there was no moving forward without letting go of what came before. Nathan hit send on both emails, closed his laptop, and went to check on Lily one last time before bed. She was already asleep, curled around her stuffed rabbit, her hair spread across the pillow like a halo. Nathan stood in the doorway for a long moment, just watching her breathe. I'm doing this for both of us, he whispered. I hope I'm making the right call. Lily didn't answer, lost in whatever dreams occupied 7-year-old minds. Nathan returned to the kitchen, poured himself a glass of water, and looked at the calendar on the refrigerator. 3 weeks. 21 days until his life changed again. He could do this. He had to do this. The alternative was staying invisible forever, and Nathan Cole was done being invisible. The next 2 weeks passed in a strange liminal space. Nathan worked his maintenance shifts with the knowledge that each one was bringing him closer to the end. His coworkers noticed something different about him, a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. But no one asked questions. In their world, people came and went all the time. Nathan was just another guy moving on. The warehouse security job was harder to leave. He'd worked alongside the same small crew for 3 years, sharing coffee and conversation during long night shifts. When Nathan explained that he was taking a position in corporate finance, the reactions ranged from surprise to genuine happiness for him. Man, I knew you were too smart for this gig, said Marcus, the lead supervisor. You always had that look like your brain was doing calculus while you walked the perimeter. Just trying to stay awake, Nathan said with a smile. Nah, it was more than that. You were always different, Cole. I'm glad you found something better. On his final security shift, the crew threw him an impromptu goodbye party. Gas station donuts and terrible coffee consumed in the break room at 2 a.m., while rain drummed against the metal roof. It was nothing fancy, but it meant something to Nathan. These people had accepted him without questions, had treated him with respect when the rest of the world seemed determined to forget he existed. You gonna forget about us when you're up in that fancy office? Asked Teresa, who worked the south gate. Not a chance, Nathan said, and meant it. During those final weeks, Victoria kept her promises. Revised settlement documents arrived, incorporating every change Nathan had requested. The NDA language explicitly permitted him to discuss his personal experience. The wage calculations had been adjusted upward to account for inflation and merit increases he would have received. The job offer included everything they'd discussed: flexible scheduling, dual reporting structure, quarterly oversight meetings. Nathan reviewed every page with the careful attention of someone who'd learned not to trust fine print. When he was satisfied, he signed his name on the final page and returned the documents to Jennifer. There was no turning back now. The night before his final maintenance shift, Nathan couldn't sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about the strange circle his life had traveled. 5 years ago, he'd walked out of Orion Dynamics in disgrace, his career in ruins, his future uncertain. In 3 days, he'd walk back in as Director of Financial Oversight and Integrity, a position that existed specifically because he'd been right all along. It should have felt like vindication. Instead, it felt like standing at the starting line of a race he wasn't sure he was ready to run. His phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from Victoria. Board meeting tomorrow at 4 p.m. We're announcing the audit results and your hiring. Press release goes out simultaneously. Wanted you to know before it becomes public. Nathan typed back. Understood. Thank you for the heads up. Another buzz. You're going to do great, Nathan. I know that doesn't mean much coming from me, but I believe it. Nathan stared at the message for a long time before responding. It means more than you think. He set the phone aside and finally drifted into restless sleep filled with dreams of marble hallways and glass offices and a daughter who asked if he was happy. His final maintenance shift began at 4:45 a.m. on a Friday morning. Nathan pushed his cart through the familiar lobby one last time, cleaned the windows he'd cleaned 1,000 times before, polished the brass railings, and felt the weight of the ending settle over him. At 8:30 a.m., his supervisor found him in the 14th floor corridor. Cole, you got a minute? Nathan looked up from wiping down a conference table. Sure, what's up? The supervisor shifted uncomfortably. Just got word from corporate. They're moving you to a different assignment, effective immediately. Nathan felt his stomach drop. I don't understand. This is my last shift. I already submitted my resignation. Yeah, I know. That's not what this is about. The supervisor pulled out his phone and showed Nathan an email. Says here you're being reassigned to executive liaison or something. Building services coordinator? I don't know, man. The terminology is above my pay grade, but you're supposed to report to the 42nd floor. Nathan read the email twice, his mind racing. This wasn't what they'd discussed. He wasn't supposed to start the new position until Monday. I'll head up there now, he said slowly. You want me to take your cart? Nathan looked at the maintenance cart, the squeaky wheels, the cleaning supplies, the physical representation of 3 years spent invisible. Yeah, he said quietly. I'm done with it. He took the elevator to the 42nd floor, his heart hammering. When he stepped out, Jennifer was waiting. Mr. Cole, she said with a smile that suggested she was in on something he wasn't. Ms. Hale asked me to bring you to the executive conference room. Nathan followed her down the hall, completely confused. The conference room door was closed. Jennifer knocked once, then opened it. Inside, the entire board of directors sat around the massive oak table. Victoria stood at the head, and beside her was a man Nathan didn't recognize, 50s, expensive suit, the kind of commanding presence that screamed senior executive. Nathan, Victoria said, thank you for coming up. I know this isn't what we planned, but circumstances changed. Please have a seat. Nathan sat in the nearest chair, acutely aware that he was wearing his maintenance uniform in a room full of people in $1,000 suits. The stranger extended his hand. Nathan Cole, I'm Robert Chen, chairman of the board. I've heard a great deal about you. Nathan shook his hand, still completely lost. Sir. I'll be direct, Chen said, settling into his seat. This morning, Orion Dynamics issued a press release announcing the results of our internal investigation, the termination of Richard Langley, and your hiring as Director of Financial Oversight and Integrity. Within an hour, we received calls from 3 major news outlets, 2 industry publications, and a request for comment from the SEC. Nathan felt ice flood his veins. That's not what I expected. Nor did we, Victoria said. Turns out, whistleblower stories have significant media appeal, especially when they involve multi-million-dollar fraud schemes and wrongful termination. Chen leaned forward. Here's the situation, Mr. Cole. The story is going to break regardless of what we do. We can either control the narrative or let others control it for us. I'm inclined to get ahead of it, but that means you're going to be in the spotlight, interviews, questions, possibly congressional inquiries if this gets as big as our lawyers think it might. Nathan's mind reeled. I didn't do this for attention. I just wanted to do the right thing. We know, Victoria said gently, and that's exactly why you're the right person to tell this story. But Nathan, you need to understand what you're walking into. This isn't just about getting your old career back. This is about becoming the face of corporate whistleblowing. Your name, your story, your daughter. It all becomes part of the public record. Nathan thought about Lily, sitting in her second-grade classroom, oblivious to the storm that was about to hit. "Can I protect her?" he asked quietly. "Can I keep her out of it?" "We can try," Chen said. "We'll have PR work with you on messaging, help you set boundaries with media. But you need to know that total privacy isn't realistic once this breaks." Nathan sat back in his chair, processing. This morning he'd been pushing a mop cart, counting down the hours to his final shift. Now he was sitting in a board meeting discussing how to handle national media attention. The universe, it seemed, had a twisted sense of humor. "What do you need from me?" he asked finally. "Right now," Victoria said. "We need you to tell us if you're prepared for this. Because once we move forward, there's no pulling back. Your life changes today, not Monday." Nathan thought about Elena, who'd always told him the truth mattered even when it was hard. He thought about Lily, who'd said being brave meant doing scary things anyway. He thought about 5 years of invisibility and silence and carefully controlled anonymity. Maybe it was time to be seen. "I'm prepared," he said. "What do we do first?" Chen smiled. "First, we get you out of that uniform and into something more appropriate for a press conference." 2 hours later, Nathan stood in front of a mirror in an executive washroom he'd cleaned dozens of times, but never actually used, wearing a suit that had been purchased, tailored, and delivered in what felt like record time. The PR team had descended on him like a tactical unit, measuring, adjusting, coaching him on talking points, while a makeup artist he didn't know he needed dabbed powder on his forehead to reduce shine under camera lights. "Remember," said Diane, the head of corporate communications, a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and the kind of calm that suggested she'd handled crises that made this look like a warm-up. "You don't have to answer every question. If something feels invasive or inappropriate, you can say, 'I'd prefer not to discuss that,' and move on. We're here to support you, not throw you to the wolves." Nathan nodded, trying to absorb the crash course in media relations he'd received over the past 90 minutes. The press conference was scheduled for 1 p.m. in the building's main conference center. Approximately 30 journalists had confirmed attendance, with more expected to call in remotely. The story had already started trending on financial news sites under headlines like "Tech Firm Uncovers Multi-Million-Dollar Internal Fraud" and "Whistleblower Vindicated After 5 Years." His phone had been buzzing non-stop with calls from numbers he didn't recognize. Diane had convinced him to turn it off entirely. "You ready?" Victoria appeared in the doorway, also clearly having received the PR team's attention. She looked camera-ready and composed, though Nathan caught the tension in her jaw. "No," Nathan said honestly. "But I don't think waiting will make me more ready." "Fair point." Victoria checked her watch. "We have 15 minutes. Walk with me." They left the washroom and headed down a side corridor, away from the growing commotion near the conference center. For a moment, they just walked in silence, their footsteps echoing on marble floors Nathan had mopped countless times. "I need to tell you something," Victoria said finally, "and I need you to hear it before we walk into that room." Nathan glanced at her. "Okay. When this story breaks, and it's going to break big, there will be people who paint me as the villain, the CEO who fired an innocent man to cover up fraud, the executive who prioritized politics over truth. And here's the thing, Nathan. They won't be wrong." She stopped walking and turned to face him. "I did those things. Not intentionally, not maliciously, but through arrogance and willful blindness that amounted to the same result. You suffered because I didn't do my job properly." "We've been through this," Nathan said quietly. "I know. But what I'm trying to say is, whatever happens in there, whatever questions they ask, I want you to tell the truth. Your truth. Don't protect me. Don't soften the parts that make the company look bad. You've already been silent for 5 years. You don't owe us your silence for one more minute." Nathan studied her face, looking for the angle, the corporate calculation. All he saw was someone who looked genuinely tired of carrying the weight of a mistake. "I'm not interested in destroying you," Nathan said. "That's not why I'm doing this." "I know," Victoria said, "but I'm giving you permission anyway, because the truth matters more than my reputation. You taught me that." Before Nathan could respond, Diane appeared around the corner. 5 minutes. We need you both in position. The conference center had been transformed into something out of a news broadcast. Cameras on tripods lined the back wall, their red lights already blinking. Journalists filled the rows of chairs, some typing furiously on laptops, others adjusting recording equipment. The podium at the front bore the Orion Dynamics logo, flanked by company flags that Nathan found almost comically formal given the circumstances. He was directed to a seat at a long table facing the audience, with Victoria on his left and Robert Chen on his right. The board's legal counsel sat at the far end, looking like he was prepared to tackle anyone who asked the wrong question. The room gradually quieted as Diane stepped to the podium. Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming on short notice. I'm Diane Fletcher, Senior Vice President of Corporate Communications for Orion Dynamics. We've called this press conference to address the results of a recently completed internal investigation and to announce significant leadership changes within the company. Chairman Chen will provide an overview, followed by CEO Victoria Hale and Director of Financial Oversight Nathan Cole. We'll take questions after the prepared statements. She stepped aside, and Chen rose to take her place at the podium. He projected the kind of authority that came from decades in boardrooms, his voice steady and clear. 6 weeks ago, Orion Dynamics became aware of potential irregularities in our financial reporting. We immediately engaged an independent forensic auditing firm to conduct a comprehensive investigation. That investigation revealed systematic fraud perpetrated by our former Chief Financial Officer, Richard Langley, over a period of at least 6 years. The total amount of misappropriated funds is estimated at $8.3 million. A murmur ran through the journalists, cameras flashed. Someone in the back row swore softly enough that Nathan almost didn't hear it. Chen continued, his tone grave. Mr. Langley has been terminated, and we are cooperating fully with federal prosecutors who are pursuing criminal charges. But the investigation also revealed something equally troubling. 5 years ago, Mr. Langley successfully framed an innocent employee for a fraud scheme that he himself was perpetrating. That employee was wrongfully terminated based on falsified evidence that this company failed to adequately verify. More murmurs, louder this time. Nathan felt his chest tighten. That employee was Nathan Cole, who is here with us today. Mr. Cole not only suffered wrongful termination, but he also lost his career in finance, his professional reputation, and years of his life because of Mr. Langley's criminal actions and our institutional failure to investigate properly. When Mr. Cole discovered new evidence of ongoing fraud 6 weeks ago, he brought it to CEO Victoria Hale's attention, despite having every reason to walk away and let the company suffer the consequences of its own negligence. His integrity and commitment to truth uncovered a fraud that could have eventually destroyed this company. We owe him not just an apology, but our gratitude. Chen gestured to Nathan. Mr. Cole has accepted a position as our Director of Financial Oversight and Integrity, a newly created role with direct reporting to myself and the CEO. He will be responsible for ensuring that what happened to him never happens to anyone else at this company. Victoria? Victoria stood and took the podium as Chen returned to his seat. She looked directly at the cameras, and Nathan realized she'd probably rehearsed this moment a dozen times with the PR team. Let me be absolutely clear about my role in what happened to Nathan Cole, she said, her voice cutting through the room. 5 years ago, when Mr. Langley presented evidence of financial misconduct, I reviewed the materials for approximately 20 minutes before making the decision to terminate Mr. Cole. I did not interview him. I did not seek independent verification. I did not question the narrative I was presented with, despite Mr. Cole's exemplary record and the severity of the accusations. The room was absolutely silent now. That was a catastrophic failure of leadership on my part, Victoria continued. I prioritized appearing decisive over being thorough. I trusted a senior executive's word without verification. I allowed an innocent man to be destroyed while the actual criminal remained in a position of power. There is no excuse for that. The responsibility is mine, and I accept it fully. Nathan watched journalists scribbling notes, typing frantically, recording every word. This was the story they'd come for, the confession, the mea culpa, the powerful executive admitting failure. Over the past 6 weeks, Victoria said, I've had the opportunity to see who Nathan Cole really is. Not the narrative Richard Langley created, but the man himself. He is someone who, despite losing everything, maintained his integrity. Someone who could have let this company collapse and felt justified in doing so, but instead chose to expose the truth because it was the right thing to do. That kind of character is rare. It's also exactly what this company needs going forward. She returned to her seat, and Diane gestured to Nathan. His legs felt unsteady as he stood. The podium seemed very far away. Every eye in the room was on him: the maintenance worker who'd pushed a mop cart, the wrongly accused, the whistleblower who'd never wanted to be one. Nathan gripped the edges of the podium and looked out at the sea of faces. 5 years ago, he began, his voice quieter than Victoria's but steady. I reported financial irregularities to my supervisor. I provided detailed documentation. I followed every protocol we had in place for flagging potential fraud. And in response, I was fired, escorted from the building by security, and blacklisted from my industry. He paused, gathering his thoughts. I lost my career. I lost my professional reputation. I spent the next 5 years working maintenance and overnight security to keep my mortgage paid and my daughter fed. When people asked what happened, I told them I'd been let go in a downsizing because the truth sounded too much like a bitter employee making excuses. Nathan's voice caught slightly. My wife told me the truth would come out eventually. She died 2 years ago, never seeing it happen. That's the cost of this kind of failure. Not just professional consequences, but human ones. The room was absolutely still. Nathan could hear someone's camera shutter clicking softly in the back. 6 weeks ago, I discovered evidence that the same fraud I'd reported 5 years earlier was still happening, and I had a choice. Stay quiet and protect myself, or speak up and risk everything again. He looked directly at the cameras. I chose to speak up because silence felt like complicity, because I couldn't watch this company destroy other people's lives and do nothing. Not because I'm particularly brave or noble, I'm not. But because my daughter asked me if I was happy, and I realized I couldn't be happy knowing I'd chosen safety over truth. Nathan took a breath. CEO Hal has taken responsibility for the failure 5 years ago, and I respect that. But I want to be clear. The real criminal here is Richard Langley. He falsified evidence. He destroyed my career to hide his crimes. He stole millions from this company and its shareholders. Whatever consequences I faced, he deserves far worse. The board has offered me a position creating oversight systems to prevent this from happening again. I've accepted it not because I've forgiven everything that happened. Forgiveness is complicated and ongoing, but because I believe in the work, because financial integrity matters, because employees deserve to work for companies where telling the truth doesn't destroy your life. He stepped back from the podium. Thank you. The silence held for another heartbeat, then erupted into a chaos of raised hands and shouted questions. Mr. Cole, how did you survive financially after your termination? Ms. Hale, will you resign over this failure? Mr. Cole, are you planning legal action against Richard Langley personally? What message does this send about corporate whistleblower protections? Diane stepped forward to manage the questions, pointing to a woman in the second row. Seattle Business Journal. Mr. Cole, you mentioned your daughter. How did this situation affect your family? Nathan felt his throat tighten. My daughter was 2 years old when I was fired. She doesn't remember me working in finance. She grew up knowing her dad left before dawn to clean office buildings. That was normal to her. I tried to shield her from the full truth, but children pick up more than you think. She knew we struggled. She knew I worked constantly. She knew something wasn't right. He paused. The hardest part wasn't my own suffering. It was watching her accept a diminished life because of crimes I didn't commit. Another hand. Bloomberg. Ms. Hale, you said this was a failure of leadership. Are there plans for you to step down? Victoria leaned toward her microphone. That decision rests with the board. If they determine my resignation is in the company's best interest, I'll comply without hesitation. But my current focus is on making this right, supporting the federal prosecution of Mr. Langley, implementing the oversight systems Mr. Cole will design, and ensuring our employees and shareholders that Orion Dynamics will emerge from this stronger and more accountable. Financial Times. Mr. Cole, you worked as maintenance in the same building where you were terminated. That must have been incredibly difficult psychologically. Why stay? Nathan considered the question. Because I needed the income and the building was hiring. Pride doesn't pay the mortgage. I took the job that was available, and I did it well. If there's shame in that, it's not mine to carry. The questions continued for another 30 minutes. Nathan answered what he could, deflected what felt too invasive, and tried not to think about the fact that every word he spoke was being recorded and would likely be quoted in articles dissected by millions of people he'd never meet. Finally, Diane called time. That concludes our press conference. Written statements and supporting documentation are available on our website. Thank you for your time. The journalists didn't leave immediately, of course. They clustered in groups, comparing notes, making phone calls to editors. Several tried to approach Nathan directly before Diane and her team formed a protective barrier and guided him out a side exit. Back in the quiet of an empty corridor, Nathan leaned against the wall and closed his eyes. "You did great," Victoria said quietly. "Really, Nathan, that was perfect." "I feel like I'm going to throw up," Nathan admitted. "That's normal. The adrenaline crash hits everyone." Victoria checked her phone and winced. "We're already trending on 3 platforms. The story's picked up by major networks. CNN wants an interview, and so does 60 Minutes. Nathan opened his eyes. "What?" "You don't have to do any of them," Diane interjected quickly. "We can issue a statement saying you've said everything you want to say publicly. But Nathan, you should know, you're going to be the face of this story whether you give more interviews or not. The narrative is already being written." Nathan's phone, still turned off in his pocket, suddenly felt like it weighed 100 pounds. When he turned it on, he'd face messages from people he hadn't heard from in years, questions from reporters. Maybe sympathy, maybe skepticism, maybe both. "What time is it?" he asked suddenly. Victoria checked. 2:45 and... "Why?" "School gets out at 3:15. Nathan pushed off the wall. "I need to pick up my daughter." "Nathan, we should probably coordinate," Diane started. "No," Nathan said firmly. "I've answered your questions. I've done the press conference. Now I'm going to pick up my daughter from school like I do every single day, and we're going to go home and have dinner and be normal. Because that's what actually matters." Victoria nodded slowly. "Do you want security? The media knows your name now. They might try to find your address, show up at your home or Lily's school." The thought hadn't occurred to Nathan, and it sent a spike of cold fear through his chest. Can they do that? Legally, yes. Ethically, debatable. But it happens. Victoria pulled out her phone. "I'm assigning you a security detail, 2 people. Former law enforcement, very discreet. They'll keep media at a distance without being invasive in your personal life, just until the initial frenzy dies down." Nathan wanted to argue, but the image of reporters ambushing Lily at school made the decision easy. "Okay, thank you. They'll meet you at the garage." Victoria hesitated. "Nathan, I know this is overwhelming. If you need to take the weekend, decompress, process everything, I'll be here Monday morning," Nathan said. "We agreed on a start date. I'm keeping it." Something that might have been respect flickered across Victoria's face. "Okay, but if you change your mind, just call." Nathan made his way to the parking garage where 2 people in plain clothes, a woman named Sarah and a man named Marcus, no relation to the parking attendant, introduced themselves with quiet professionalism. They would follow at a discreet distance, they explained. He wouldn't notice them unless there was a problem. The drive to Greenwood Elementary felt surreal. Nathan kept expecting reporters to jump out from behind parked cars, but the streets were blissfully normal. Parents in minivans, delivery trucks, a dog walker tangled in leashes. He pulled into the school pickup lane at exactly 3:12 p.m., 3 minutes early, as always. Sarah and Marcus parked half a block away, barely visible. When Lily emerged from the building, Nathan felt something inside him unknot slightly. She looked exactly the same as she had that morning. Braids a little messy, backpack bouncing, completely oblivious to the fact that her father had just become a minor news story. She climbed into the back seat with her usual explosion of energy. "Guess what, Dad? We started a new art project and mine is going to be a castle with a dragon. And..." She stopped mid-sentence. "Why are you wearing a fancy suit and why do you look weird?" "What kind of weird?" Nathan asked, pulling out of the parking lot. "Like you're trying not to look worried, but you are. Anyway." Nathan glanced in the rearview mirror at his too perceptive daughter. "Something big happened at work today. I'm okay, but it's been a lot." "What happened?" How did he explain this? "Remember how I told you I was taking a new job at the company?" "Yeah." "Well, today we told some reporters about it. about why I left the company before and why I'm coming back. It's going to be in the news. Lily processed this. Like on TV news? Maybe. Probably. Are you famous now? Nathan laughed despite himself. No, kiddo, not famous, just temporarily interesting. Can I tell people at school? Let's wait and see what happens first, okay? It might not be a big deal. Lily accepted this with the easy flexibility of childhood and launched back into her story about the dragon castle. Nathan listened, grateful for the normalcy of her voice, and tried not to think about what the weekend would bring. At home, Nathan's phone, now turned back on, showed 83 missed calls and over 200 unread messages. He turned it off again. Mrs. Chen arrived at her usual time, took one look at Nathan's face, and immediately started making tea. I saw the news, she said simply. You were good, honest. Now sit down before you fall down. Nathan sat. Lily settled at the kitchen table with her homework. Mrs. Chen placed a cup of tea in front of him that smelled like jasmine and something herbal he couldn't identify. Drink, she ordered. It'll help. Nathan drank. It didn't help with the surreal feeling that his life had been turned inside out in the span of 6 hours, but it was warm and grounding and gave him something to focus on besides the chaos in his head. There are people outside, Mrs. Chen said casually, slicing vegetables for dinner. With cameras. They knocked on my door thinking it was yours. I told them to leave or I'd call the police. Nathan's head snapped up. When? 20 minutes before you got home. They left, but they'll probably be back. I have security watching the house, Nathan said. They should have prevented. They did. They're the ones who told the reporters to leave, very polite about it. Mrs. Chen smiled slightly. The young woman said to tell you the perimeter is secure and you shouldn't worry. Nathan dropped his head into his hands. This is insane. This is temporary, Mrs. Chen corrected. By next week, there will be some new scandal and everyone will forget about you. Until then, we keep Lily's routine normal and ignore the noise. Speaking of which, Lily, homework finished? Almost, Lily said, not looking up from her math worksheet. The evening proceeded with determined normalcy. Dinner was stir-fry with vegetables from Mrs. Chen's garden. Lily talked about her dragon castle and a boy named Trevor who'd been mean to her friend at recess. Nathan helped with homework, read 2 chapters of the book they were working through together, and tucked her into bed with the usual routine. Dad? Lily said as he was turning off her light. Yeah, kiddo. Are the people with cameras going to come back tomorrow? So she had noticed more than she'd let on. Maybe, but they can't come into our house, and the security people won't let them bother us. You're safe, Lily. I promise. I'm not scared, Lily said. I just wanted to make sure you were okay. Nathan felt his throat tighten. When had his daughter become the one worrying about him? I'm okay, he said. Today was hard, but I'm okay. And I'm really glad I get to come home to you at the end of it. Lily smiled sleepily. Me too. Love you, Dad. Love you too, kiddo. Sweet dreams. Nathan closed her door and returned to the kitchen, where Mrs. Chen was finishing the dishes. She's worried about you, Mrs. Chen observed. I know. Good that she worries a little. Means she pays attention. But don't let her carry too much. She's 7. I'm trying. Mrs. Chen dried her hands and turned to face him. This job you took, it's going to be hard. Not just the work, but being visible again. Being someone people recognize and have opinions about. You've been invisible for 3 years. That's safe. This is the opposite of safe. I know, Nathan said quietly. Good. As long as you know what you signed up for. She patted his arm. But you'll be fine. You're stronger than you think. You survived 5 years of hell. You can survive success too. After Mrs. Chen left, Nathan sat alone in his kitchen and finally allowed himself to feel the full weight of the day. The press conference, the cameras, the questions about his daughter, the knowledge that strangers all over the country were reading about his life, forming opinions about choices he'd made under circumstances they couldn't fully understand. It was terrifying. It was also, in some strange way, freeing. For 5 years, Nathan had carried the truth alone. Now it was out in the world, witnessed and recorded. Richard Langley's crimes were public knowledge. Nathan's innocence was established fact, not desperate protestation. The story had been told, and the telling meant he didn't have to carry it by himself anymore. Nathan's phone buzzed. He'd turned it back on to check for any urgent messages from the security team. A text from Victoria. "How are you holding up?" He typed back, "Overwhelmed but okay. Lily's asleep. Reporters were here but security handled it." "Good. Take the weekend. Don't think about work. We'll figure everything else out Monday." Nathan smiled slightly. "Thank you. For today. For all of it. You did the hard part. I just provided the platform." Nathan set down his phone and walked to Lily's room one more time just to check. She was sprawled across her bed, her stuffed rabbit clutched tight, breathing the deep rhythm of childhood sleep. She didn't know that her father had become a news story. She didn't know that tomorrow kids at school might mention seeing him on TV. She didn't know that their quiet life was about to get a lot more complicated. But she knew she was loved. She knew her dad came home every night. She knew she was safe. And for tonight, that was enough. Nathan returned to his own room, set his alarm for the first time in years to a reasonable 7 a.m. instead of 4 a.m., and lay down in the darkness. Monday, he would start his new position. Monday, he would walk into Orion Dynamics as Director of Financial Oversight and Integrity. Monday, he would begin the work of making sure no one else had to suffer what he'd suffered. But tonight, he was just Nathan Cole, father of one brilliant daughter, survivor of impossible odds, and someone who'd finally told his truth to the world. Sleep came easier than he'd expected, and when morning arrived, Nathan woke to find that the world hadn't ended. The sun still rose. Lily still needed breakfast. The house still stood. Whatever came next, they would face it together. And that, Nathan realized, was all he'd ever really needed. The weekend passed in a strange bubble of semi-normalcy, punctuated by moments of surreal intrusion. Saturday morning, Nathan woke to find his story on the front page of the Seattle Times business section with a headline that read, "From Janitor to Justice, One Man's Fight Against Corporate Fraud." The photo they'd used was from the press conference. Nathan at the podium, his expression serious, looking nothing like the invisible maintenance worker he'd been just days before. Lily found the newspaper on the kitchen table while Nathan was making breakfast. "Is that you?" she asked, pointing at the photo. "Yeah, kiddo," Nathan said, flipping pancakes with more attention than they required. "You look important." Nathan smiled despite the knot in his stomach. "I don't know about important, just telling the truth." "Trevor's mom is going to see this," Lily said matter-of-factly. "She reads the newspaper. She's going to tell Trevor, and Trevor's going to tell everyone at school." Nathan set down the spatula and knelt beside his daughter's chair. "Does that bother you, that people will know?" Lily thought about it seriously. "I don't know yet. Maybe it'll be weird, but Mommy used to say that weird isn't always bad. It's just different." Nathan pulled her into a hug, marveling once again at the wisdom that somehow lived inside this small person. "Your mom was very smart." "I know," Lily said. "Can I have chocolate chips in my pancakes?" The media attention peaked over the weekend, and then, as Mrs. Chen had predicted, began to fade. By Sunday evening, Nathan's story had been pushed down the news cycle by a political scandal and a celebrity divorce. The reporters who'd camped outside his house had mostly dispersed, though Sarah and Marcus maintained their discreet presence just in case. Nathan spent Sunday afternoon doing something he hadn't done in years, preparing for a first day of work that didn't involve a maintenance uniform or a security guard booth. He organized his notes on financial oversight systems. He reviewed the organizational charts Victoria had sent him. He laid out his clothes for Monday with the kind of nervous energy he remembered from his very first corporate job, fresh out of college and terrified of making mistakes. That night, after Lily was asleep, Nathan stood in what would soon be his home office, a converted spare bedroom that had mostly been used for storage, and allowed himself to feel the full weight of what was about to begin. Tomorrow, he would walk into Orion Dynamics not as someone seeking redemption, but as someone who'd already earned his place. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure. His phone buzzed. A text from Victoria. "First day jitters?" Nathan smiled and typed back. "Is it that obvious? Everyone gets them. Even CEOs. Especially CEOs, actually. See you at 9. Monday morning arrived with typical Seattle drizzle. Nathan woke at 6:30 a.m. late by his old standards, impossibly early by most people's, and went through his morning routine with Lily. Breakfast, backpack check, teeth brushing, the usual gentle chaos of getting a 7-year-old ready for school. "Are you excited?" Lily asked as Nathan walked her to the bus stop, umbrella held over both their heads. "I think so," Nathan said. "Mostly nervous, but the good kind of nervous." "Like before a spelling test when you studied really hard?" "Exactly like that." The bus arrived and Lily gave him a quick hug before climbing aboard. Nathan watched until the bus disappeared around the corner, then walked back to his house with a strange sense of beginning settling over him. At 8:15 a.m., Nathan drove downtown in traffic that felt almost leisurely compared to his pre-dawn commutes. He parked in the executive garage. His security badge now granted him access to levels he'd never been authorized to enter, and took the elevator up to the 42nd floor. Jennifer greeted him with a warm smile. "Good morning, Mr. Cole. Welcome to your first official day. Ms. Hale asked me to show you to your office once you arrived." "I have an office?" Nathan had known this intellectually, but hearing it confirmed made it real in a way the job offer documents hadn't. "You do indeed. Follow me." She led him down a corridor he'd cleaned dozens of times, past executive offices with names on the doors, to a corner suite with windows overlooking Elliott Bay. The nameplate beside the door read Nathan Cole, Director of Financial Oversight and Integrity, in clean professional letters. Nathan stood in the doorway taking it in. The office was smaller than Victoria's, but still impressive. Real wood desk, credenza, 2 guest chairs, a small conference table by the windows. Someone had already set up a computer, dual monitors, a desk phone with more buttons than seemed necessary. "Ms. Hale selected this office specifically," Jennifer said. "She thought you'd appreciate the view." Nathan walked to the windows. From this height, he could see the ferries moving across the bay, the Olympic Mountains in the distance, the city sprawling out in all directions. It was beautiful. It was also nothing like the basement locker room where he'd changed into his maintenance uniform for 3 years. "It's perfect," Nathan said quietly. "I'll let Ms. Hale know you've arrived," Jennifer said, slipping out and closing the door behind her. Nathan stood alone in his office, and let himself feel the moment. 5 years ago, he'd been escorted out of this building in disgrace. Now he was standing in a corner office with his name on the door and a mandate to prevent what happened to him from happening to anyone else. The symmetry was almost too perfect to be real. A knock on his door pulled him from his thoughts. Victoria entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you might need this," she said, handing him one. "First day is always exhausting, even before it starts." "Thank you." Nathan took the coffee gratefully. "The office it's more than I expected. You're in a senior leadership position. The office reflects that." Victoria settled into one of the guest chairs. "How are you feeling? Honestly?" Nathan sat behind his desk, and considered the question. Overwhelmed, grateful, terrified I'm going to wake up and discover this was all some elaborate dream. "It's real," Victoria said, "and you've earned it, but I need to prepare you for something. The first few weeks are going to be difficult in ways that have nothing to do with the actual work." "What do you mean?" "You're walking into a company where some people know your story and some don't. The ones who don't might remember you as the guy who got fired for fraud and wonder why you're suddenly back in a leadership position. The ones who do know might treat you like a victim or a hero or both. Some of the executives you'll be overseeing will resent your authority. Some will test your boundaries, and everyone will be watching to see what kind of leader you are." Nathan absorbed this. "So basically, I need to prove myself all over again." "In a sense, yes. But Nathan, you've already proven yourself where it matters most. To me, to the board, and most importantly to yourself. The rest is just noise." Victoria set down her coffee cup. "I'm telling you this not to discourage you, but to prepare you. You're not going to be invisible anymore. Every decision you make, every audit you conduct, every finding you report, it will have visibility and consequences. Some people will love you for it. Some will hate you. Can you handle that?" Nathan thought about the past 5 years. The invisibility had been painful, but it had also been safe. This new visibility came with risk, professional, personal, emotional. But Lily's voice echoed in his mind. Being brave means doing scary things anyway. I can handle it, Nathan said. I have to, because if I can't, then what was the point of any of this? Victoria smiled. That's the right answer. She stood. There's a department heads meeting at 10. I'd like you to attend. It'll be your introduction to the executive team. Some of them already know who you are. The rest need to hear it from me. Fair warning. It might be uncomfortable. I'll be there, Nathan said. After Victoria left, Nathan spent the next hour familiarizing himself with his new setup. He logged into his computer. His credentials worked on the first try, which felt like a small miracle. His email inbox was empty except for a welcome message from IT and a meeting invitation for the 10 o'clock department heads meeting. He opened the shared drives he now had access to and felt a rush of something like vertigo. Financial data, audit reports, board presentations, information he'd been locked out of for 5 years, now available at his fingertips. It was almost too much. At 9:45, Nathan gathered his notebook and headed to the executive conference room. He arrived early, giving himself time to choose a seat, not at the head of the table, that was Victoria's position, but not at the far end either. Somewhere in the middle, where he could see everyone and be seen. Executives began filtering in around 9:50. Nathan recognized some faces from his previous life at the company, though most were new. A few people nodded politely in his direction. Others studiously avoided eye contact. Derek Huang entered, the man who now occupied Nathan's old office. He stopped short when he saw Nathan, surprise flickering across his face before being replaced with a professionally neutral expression. Nathan Cole, Derek said, extending his hand. I've been reading about you. Quite a story. Nathan shook his hand. Derek Huang, you're in financial analysis now. Have been for 3 years. Derek's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. Your old office, actually. I trust there are no hard feelings about that. None at all, Nathan said evenly. You didn't take anything from me. Someone else did that. The tension in Derek's shoulders eased slightly. Fair point. Welcome back. By 10 o'clock, the conference room was full. 12 department heads, Victoria at the head of the table, and Nathan somewhere in the middle, acutely aware of the curious glances being directed his way. Victoria called the meeting to order with her usual efficiency. Good morning, everyone. Before we get into our regular agenda, I want to formally introduce our newest executive team member. Most of you have probably seen the news coverage by now, but for those who haven't, this is Nathan Cole, our new Director of Financial Oversight and Integrity. She paused, letting the introduction settle. Nathan's position is unprecedented in our company structure. He reports directly to me and to the board's audit committee. His mandate is to implement comprehensive oversight systems to prevent the kind of fraud we recently uncovered. He has authority to audit any department, review any transaction, and investigate any irregularity, with no exceptions for seniority or politics. Nathan felt several sets of eyes on him, some curious, some calculating. Some of you may know, Victoria continued, her voice taking on a harder edge, that Nathan worked for Orion Dynamics 5 years ago and was wrongfully terminated based on falsified evidence created by Richard Langley to cover his fraud. Nathan not only endured that injustice with integrity, but when he discovered evidence of ongoing fraud 6 weeks ago, he brought it to my attention despite having every reason to let this company suffer the consequences of its own failures. We owe our current financial stability to his courage and commitment to truth. The room was absolutely silent. I expect each of you to cooperate fully with Nathan's work. If he requests information, you provide it. If he identifies concerns, you address them. If you have questions about his authority, you direct them to me. Victoria's gaze swept the table. Are we clear? A murmur of assent rippled through the executives. Good. Nathan, would you like to say anything? Nathan hadn't prepared remarks, but he found himself standing anyway. 12 faces turned toward him, ranging from friendly to skeptical to openly wary. I appreciate the introduction, Nathan said. I know my return to this company is unusual. I know some of you might have questions about my qualifications, my agenda, or why the board created this position. So let me be direct. I'm not here to play politics or settle scores. I'm here because financial oversight matters. Because employees deserve to work for a company where the controls actually work. Because shareholders deserve to trust that their investments are being managed with integrity. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. Over the next few weeks, I'll be meeting with each of your departments to understand your operations and identify potential vulnerabilities. These won't be gotcha audits looking for someone to blame. They'll be constructive assessments aimed at strengthening our systems. I expect transparency, cooperation, and honesty. In exchange, I'll provide the same. Nathan met each person's eyes in turn. What happened to me 5 years ago happened because one person was able to manipulate the system without adequate oversight. My job is to make sure that's impossible going forward. I hope you'll see that as protection, not persecution. He sat down. The silence held for another beat. Then Victoria moved on to the regular agenda. Quarterly projections, upcoming board presentations, staffing updates. Nathan listened, taking notes, trying to absorb the rhythm of these meetings that would now be part of his regular routine. When the meeting ended, several executives made a point of introducing themselves properly. Others left quickly, avoiding interaction. Derek Huang lingered near the door. "That was a good speech," he said quietly. "For what it's worth, I'm glad you're back. What happened to you was wrong. I didn't know you before, but I'm glad someone's finally making it right." "Thank you," Nathan said, genuinely surprised. "That means something. If you need anything while you're reviewing financial analysis, my door's open. Literally, it's your old office, after all." Nathan smiled. "I appreciate that." The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings, system introductions, and conversations with the audit team that would support his work. By 4 p.m., Nathan's brain felt overfull, like he'd tried to download 5 years of missing information in 8 hours. His phone alarm went off, the reminder he'd set to leave in time to pick up Lily from school. Nathan gathered his things, said goodbye to Jennifer, and took the elevator down to the parking garage. The drive to Greenwood Elementary felt like traveling between two different worlds. At Orion Dynamics, he was Director Cole, senior executive, the man who'd exposed fraud and returned in triumph. At his daughter's school, he was just Lily's dad, the guy in the pickup lane. He preferred the latter. Lily bounced into the car with her usual energy, talking about a science experiment involving vinegar and baking soda. "How was your first day?" she asked when she paused for breath. "Good," Nathan said. "Busy, a lot to learn." "Did people know who you were?" "Most of them, yeah." "Were they nice?" Nathan thought about Derek's unexpected kindness, Victoria's support, the wary expressions of executives who weren't sure what to make of him yet. "Most of them were nice," he said. "Some were confused, but that's okay. We'll figure it out." "Okay." Lily returned her attention to her backpack, digging for something. "Oh, I forgot to tell you. Mrs. Patterson said we're having a parent-teacher conference next week. She gave me this." She handed Nathan a form. "You have to sign it and pick a time." Nathan took the form, scanning the available slots. Most were during traditional work hours. In his old life, his maintenance and security life, he would have had to beg for time off, rearrange shifts, stress about lost income. Now he had flexible hours and schedule autonomy. "How about Tuesday at 3:30? Nathan said. "That works for you?" "Yeah, can we get ice cream after?" "Probably," Nathan said, smiling. "Let me make sure we have a good conference first." That evening followed their established routine: homework, dinner, playtime, bath, books, bed. But something felt different. Nathan realized he wasn't counting hours until his next shift, wasn't calculating how much sleep he'd get before his alarm went off at 4 a.m., wasn't mentally reviewing his schedule to figure out when he'd have time to pay bills or do laundry. For the first time in 5 years, he could just be present. After Lily was asleep, Nathan sat in his new home office and reviewed the notes from his first day. The scope of work ahead was massive, reviewing every financial control system, interviewing department heads, building audit protocols, creating reporting mechanisms. It would take months, maybe years, to fully implement the oversight structure he envisioned. But for the first time, Nathan felt like he had the time and resources to do it right. His phone buzzed. A text from Victoria. "Survived day 1. How do you feel?" Nathan considered the question, cautiously optimistic, still processing. "Good. That's the right attitude. Don't try to fix everything on day 1. This is a marathon, not a sprint." "Understood. Thank you for today, for the introduction, the support, all of it. You earned it, Nathan. See you tomorrow." The weeks that followed established a new rhythm. Nathan arrived at Orion Dynamics around 8:30, spent his mornings in meetings or reviewing financial systems, had lunch at his desk while reading audit reports, spent his afternoons conducting interviews or analyzing data, and left by 3 to pick up Lily from school. Evenings were hers, homework help, dinner, whatever activity filled that day's schedule. After she went to bed, Nathan would work another hour or two, but it felt different than his overnight security shifts. This was engaged work, meaningful work, work that mattered. The parent-teacher conference happened on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Mrs. Patterson, Lily's second-grade teacher, was a warm woman in her 50s who clearly adored her students. "Lily is doing wonderfully," she said, showing Nathan examples of his daughter's work. "She's reading above grade level, her math skills are strong, and she's very popular with the other students. Very kind, very inclusive." Nathan felt pride swell in his chest. "That's good to hear." "I do want to mention one thing," Mrs. Patterson said carefully. "Some of the other children have been asking Lily about the news stories, about you. She's handled it very maturely, but I wanted you to know it's come up." Nathan's stomach tightened. "Has anyone been unkind to her about it?" "Not unkind, no, just curious. You know how children are. They hear their parents talking about something and they repeat it without fully understanding." Mrs. Patterson smiled. "Lily told them her dad helps catch bad guys who steal money, which is, well, it's not inaccurate." Nathan laughed despite his anxiety. "That's one way to put it." "She's very proud of you," Mrs. Patterson said. "I thought you should know that." After the conference, Nathan took Lily for the promised ice cream. They sat in their usual booth while she devoured mint chocolate chip and he nursed black coffee. "Mrs. Patterson says some kids asked you about the news stories," Nathan said carefully. Lily shrugged. "Yeah, Trevor asked if you were famous. I said no, you just told the truth about something important." "That's exactly right," Nathan said. "Did it bother you, the questions?" "Not really. I just told them what happened. You used to work at a company, a bad man lied about you, you got fired, but then you found out the bad man was still lying, so you told the truth and now you work there again. It's not that complicated." Nathan marveled at her ability to distill 5 years of pain into a simple narrative. "No, I guess it's not. Plus, Maya said her dad read about you and said you were brave, so that was cool." Nathan reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "You're pretty amazing, you know that?" "I know," Lily said with the unselfconscious confidence of 7. "Can I have sprinkles next time?" 6 weeks into his new position, Nathan delivered his first major report to Victoria, the board's audit committee. He'd identified 17 areas where financial controls needed strengthening, ranging from minor procedural updates to significant structural changes in how transactions were authorized and reviewed. The board meeting where he presented his findings was intimidating. 12 board members, Victoria, the general counsel, and Nathan at the front of the room with his presentation loaded on the screen. But he'd prepared thoroughly, and more importantly, he believed in the work. "The good news," Nathan said, clicking through his slides, "is that our current controls are adequate to prevent fraud at the scale we recently experienced, provided they're actually followed. The bad news is that we have numerous single points of failure where one person can override or circumvent controls without triggering reviews." He walked them through each finding, explaining the vulnerability, the potential impact, and his recommended solution. The board members asked sharp questions. Nathan answered them, and when he didn't know something, he said so and promised to follow up. At the end of the presentation, Robert Chen leaned back in his chair and nodded slowly. "This is excellent work, Mr. Cole. Thorough, actionable, realistic. How long to implement your recommendations?" "Phased implementation over 18 months, Nathan said. High priority items in the first quarter, medium priority in quarters 2 and 3, long-term structural changes in the final phases. We'll need budget approval for additional audit staff and system upgrades." "You'll have it," Chen said. "Anything else you need?" Nathan glanced at Victoria, who gave him an encouraging nod. "Authority to enforce compliance," Nathan said. "The best controls in the world don't work if people ignore them. I need the board's backing to hold executives accountable when they circumvent oversight systems." "You have it," Chen said immediately. "Unanimously, I suspect." He looked around the table. "Any objections?" Silence. "Then it's settled. Mr. Cole, you have our full support. Make these changes happen. After the board meeting, Victoria caught up with Nathan in the hallway. That was masterful, she said. You had them eating out of your hand. I just told them the truth, Nathan said, backed up with data. Don't undersell it. You commanded that room. Victoria paused. I have to ask, are you happy, Nathan? Really happy? Not just satisfied or content, but actually happy? Nathan considered the question. 6 weeks ago, he would have said happiness was too big an ask. That contentment, stability, and safety for Lily were enough. But now, yeah, he said slowly. I think I actually am. It's strange to say after everything, but I wake up in the morning and I'm not dreading the day. I'm engaged with my work. I'm present with my daughter. I'm not carrying the weight of injustice everywhere I go. He met Victoria's eyes. I never thought I'd feel this way again. So yes, I'm happy. Victoria smiled, and for once, it reached her eyes. Good. You deserve it. 3 months into his tenure, Nathan received an unexpected visitor. Jennifer buzzed his office around 2 p.m. on a Thursday. Mr. Cole, there's someone here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's important. Her name is Rebecca Martinez. Nathan didn't recognize the name. Did she say what it's about? No, but Jennifer lowered her voice. She looks nervous, like she's scared to be here. Nathan's instincts, honed by years of analyzing financial irregularities, prickled. Send her in. Rebecca Martinez was young, maybe 25, dressed in business casual and clutching a folder like it was a life preserver. She reminded Nathan forcefully of himself 5 years earlier, walking into Richard Langley's office with evidence of fraud and no idea his life was about to implode. Miss Martinez, Nathan said, standing and offering his hand. I'm Nathan Cole, please, sit down. Can I get you coffee? Water? Water would be good, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Nathan poured her a glass from the pitcher on his credenza and sat in the guest chair beside her rather than behind his desk. Less intimidating that way. What can I do for you? He asked gently. Rebecca took a sip of water, set down the glass, and opened her folder with trembling hands. I work in accounts payable, she said. I've been here for 2 years. I love my job. I don't want to lose it. But I found something, and I don't know what to do. And then I read about what happened to you, and I thought maybe you would understand. Nathan felt his chest tighten. What did you find? Rebecca pulled out a stack of printouts. Vendor payments. The amounts are small, a few $1,000s each, but they're going to a company I can't find any record of. No contract, no purchase orders, no receipts. Just approved payments every month for the past 6 months. Nathan took the printouts and scanned them. His trained eye immediately caught the pattern. Irregular vendor, unusual approval chain, amounts just below the threshold that would trigger automatic review. Have you reported this to your supervisor? Nathan asked. I tried, Rebecca said, and her voice cracked slightly. She told me I was being paranoid, that the vendor was probably legitimate, and I just didn't have access to the contract files. She said if I kept pushing, I'd make people think I couldn't handle my job. Rebecca looked at Nathan with eyes that held barely contained fear. I read what happened to you, how you reported something and got fired. I can't afford to lose this job, Mr. Cole. I have student loans. My mom depends on me. But I also can't just ignore this. What if it's another fraud? What if I say nothing and it gets worse? Nathan felt something shift in his chest, the reason he'd taken this job crystallizing into sharp focus. This was exactly what he was here to prevent, not just the fraud itself, but the fear that kept good people from reporting it. Rebecca, he said quietly, look at me. She met his eyes, her own bright with unshed tears. You did exactly the right thing coming here. What you found is concerning, and it deserves investigation. But here's what's different now. My entire job exists to make sure that people who report irregularities are protected, not punished. You won't be fired. You won't be retaliated against. And if your supervisor gives you any trouble about this, she'll answer to me and the board. Rebecca let out a shaky breath. Really? Really, I'm going to take these documents and investigate. If it turns out to be legitimate, we'll close the file and no one will think less of you for flagging it. If it's fraud, you just prevented it from getting worse. Nathan leaned forward. Either way, You did your job exactly right. That kind of diligence is what we need, and I'm going to make sure everyone knows it." Rebecca's shoulders sagged with relief. "Thank you. Thank you so much." After she left, Nathan spent the rest of the afternoon tracing the vendor payments. It took him less than 3 hours to confirm what Rebecca had suspected. The vendor was a shell company, the payments were fraudulent, and the approval signature belonged to Rebecca's supervisor. It was a small fraud, maybe $30,000 total, but it was exactly the kind of thing that grew if left unchecked. Nathan documented everything, then called Victoria. "We have a situation," he said. "Small-scale fraud in accounts payable. I need to move quickly before evidence disappears." "Do it," Victoria said immediately. "You have my full support." By end of day Friday, Rebecca's supervisor had been suspended and an investigation was underway. Nathan made a point of speaking to Rebecca personally to thank her for her diligence and assure her that she'd done the right thing. "You saved the company money and prevented this from getting worse," Nathan told her. "That's worth recognition, not punishment." Rebecca left his office looking lighter, like she'd put down a weight she'd been carrying. Nathan thought about himself 5 years ago, walking into Richard Langley's office with similar evidence and similar fear. No one had protected him. No one had assured him he'd done the right thing. No one had prevented the retaliation that destroyed his life. But he could protect Rebecca. He could make sure the system worked the way it was supposed to. He could be the person he'd needed 5 years ago. That night, over dinner, Lily asked him why he was smiling. "Just had a good day at work," Nathan said. "What made it good?" Nathan thought about how to explain it. "Someone needed help, and I was able to help them. That felt really good." Lily nodded seriously. "That's what Mommy used to say made her happy, helping people." Nathan felt his throat tighten. "She did say that. She was very smart." "I miss her," Lily said quietly. "Me too, kiddo, me too." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, then Lily brightened. "Can we have movie night tonight? We haven't done that in forever." "You're right, we haven't. Pick something good." They ended up watching an animated film about a girl who saved her island, curled together on the couch with popcorn and blankets. Halfway through, Lily fell asleep against Nathan's shoulder, and he found himself thinking about the strange journey that had brought him to this moment. 5 years of struggle, 5 years of invisibility, 5 years of carrying the weight of injustice while trying to build a stable life for his daughter. And now this, a good job, a comfortable home, the ability to help people like Rebecca avoid what he'd endured. It wasn't the life he'd planned. It was better than the one he'd lost. And it was entirely, imperfectly his. 6 months into his role, Nathan received a call from the U.S. Attorney's Office. Richard Langley's trial was scheduled to begin in 3 weeks, and Nathan was being called as a witness. The news sent a jolt of anxiety through him. He'd known this was coming, had known since the day the criminal charges were filed, but knowing intellectually and facing it emotionally were different things. "I have to testify," Nathan told Victoria when he briefed her on the call. "The prosecutor says my testimony about the original fraud and Langley's falsification of evidence is crucial to establishing pattern of behavior." "Do you want the company to provide legal support?" Victoria asked. "We can have counsel with you, help you prepare." "No," Nathan said. "I think I need to do this myself. But thank you." The 3 weeks passed too quickly. Nathan prepared with the prosecutor, reviewed his original documentation, and tried not to think too hard about facing Richard Langley across a courtroom. The night before his testimony, Nathan couldn't sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about all the things he wanted to say to the man who'd destroyed his life. All the anger, the hurt, the years of struggle that could be laid directly at Langley's feet. But when morning came and Nathan sat in the witness box, looking at Richard Langley for the first time in 5 years, he felt nothing. Not anger, not hatred, not even the grim satisfaction he'd expected. Just a quiet sense that this man no longer had power over him. Nathan testified for 2 hours, walking the jury through his discovery of the original fraud, his report to Langley, the falsified evidence that had been used to fire him. He answered the prosecutor's questions clearly, withstood the defense attorney's cross-examination without losing his composure, and told the truth exactly as it had happened. When he stepped down from the witness stand, Nathan felt lighter. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Nathan followed the news coverage but tried not to obsess over it. when the jury returned a guilty verdict on all counts. He felt a sense of completion rather than vindication. Justice, it turned out, was quieter than he'd expected. Richard Langley was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison and ordered to pay restitution. The news made headlines for a day, then faded into the background noise of the world's endless scandals. Nathan went back to work. 1 year after returning to Orion Dynamics, Nathan was called to an unexpected meeting with Victoria and Robert Chen. He arrived at Victoria's office to find both of them looking pleased about something. "Have a seat, Nathan," Chen said. "We have something we want to discuss with you." Nathan sat, curious but wary. "Is everything okay?" "Everything's excellent," Victoria said. "Your first annual review came back with unanimous praise from the board. The oversight systems you've implemented are working exactly as intended. We've prevented 3 potential fraud attempts in the past 6 months alone, because people like Rebecca know they can report concerns without fear. Your work has fundamentally changed the culture of this company." "That's good to hear," Nathan said, genuinely pleased. "Which brings us to why we asked you here," Chen said. "We'd like to expand your role. The board is creating a new position, Chief Compliance and Ethics Officer. It would encompass your current responsibilities but add oversight of HR compliance, legal ethics, and corporate governance. You'd have a seat on the executive committee and report directly to the board." "Well," Nathan blinked. That's a significant expansion." "It is," Victoria agreed. "It would also come with a significant increase in compensation and a seat at the table for major strategic decisions. We think you've more than earned it, but we want to make sure it's what you want. This would be a bigger job, more visibility, more demands on your time." Nathan thought about Lily, about the balance he'd carefully constructed between work and family. "Can I maintain schedule flexibility for family obligations?" he asked. "Absolutely," Chen said. "That's non-negotiable. We're not asking you to sacrifice your daughter's well-being for this company. We're asking you to bring the same integrity you've shown in oversight to a broader scope of responsibility." Nathan sat back, processing. A year ago, he'd been pushing a mop cart. Now he was being offered one of the most senior positions in the company. Elena's voice whispered in his memory. "The truth will come out eventually." She'd been right. The truth had come out. And in its wake, opportunities Nathan had never imagined had emerged. "I'd like 24 hours to think about it," Nathan said. "This is a big decision." "Take the time you need," Victoria said. "We're not going anywhere." That evening, Nathan took Lily to their favorite ice cream shop. While she worked on a cone of mint chocolate chip, he explained the job offer in terms she could understand. "So they want you to have an even more important job?" Lily asked. "Yeah, more responsibility, more work, but also more ability to help people and make sure the company does the right thing. Would you still pick me up from school?" "Always," Nathan promised. "That's not changing." Lily thought about this seriously. "Then I think you should do it. You're really good at your job, Dad. And you're happy. I can tell." Nathan felt something warm expand in his chest. "When did you get so wise?" "I've always been wise," Lily said with exaggerated patience. "You just noticed." Nathan laughed and ruffled her hair. "Fair point." That night, after Lily was asleep, Nathan sat in his home office and composed an email to Victoria and Robert Chen. "I've thought about your offer. I'm honored, and I accept. Let's talk about transition timeline and role specifications." Monday morning. He hit send before he could second-guess himself. The next morning, Nathan woke to a response from Victoria. "Excellent. Welcome to the executive committee. The board will be thrilled." 2 years after returning to Orion Dynamics, Nathan stood on the balcony of his new home, a 3-bedroom house in a good school district with a yard big enough for Lily to play in, and watched his daughter chase fireflies in the twilight. They'd moved 6 months ago, upgrading from the small bungalow that had housed them through the worst years. The new house had space for Lily to grow, a real office for Nathan, and a kitchen where they could cook together without bumping into each other. It felt like a statement. We're not just surviving anymore. We're thriving. Inside, Mrs. Chen was setting the table for dinner. She'd become a fixture in their lives, more family than babysitter, and Nathan had long since stopped trying to pay her for the countless hours she spent with Lily. "You just gonna stand out there wool gathering, or you going to come help?" Mrs. Chen called. Nathan smiled and went inside. Over dinner, Mrs. Chen's dumplings, which Lily had declared the best food in the universe. Nathan's phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. Board meeting went well. Your compliance report was exactly what they needed to hear. Nice work. Nathan replied with a simple thanks and set the phone aside. Work was good. The compliance and ethics program he'd built was being studied by other companies as a model for effective oversight. He'd been invited to speak at industry conferences, had written an article for a major business journal about building whistleblower-friendly cultures, and had quietly helped a dozen employees navigate concerns without fear of retaliation. But the best part of his life wasn't the professional success. It was this: sitting at a dinner table with his daughter and the woman who'd become their adopted grandmother, eating dumplings and listening to Lily describe an elaborate fantasy world she'd created in art class. And then the dragon princess, that's me, defeats the evil wizard and saves the kingdom, Lily concluded triumphantly. As she should, Mrs. Chen said. Dragon princesses are very powerful. Dad, you're not listening, Lily accused. I am listening, Nathan protested. Dragon princess defeats wizard, saves kingdom. I heard every word. But you have that look on your face again. The thinking face. Nathan smiled. I was just thinking about how lucky I am. To be here with you two, to have this life. Lily reached across the table and patted his hand, an echo of the gesture she'd made years ago in an ice cream shop when Nathan was trying to decide whether to be brave. We're lucky too, Dad, she said seriously, because you're the best dad ever. Nathan felt his throat tighten with emotion. I don't know about that, kiddo. I do, Lily said with absolute certainty. And I'm very smart, so I'm probably right. Mrs. Chen laughed. Can't argue with that logic. Later, after dinner was cleared and Lily was in bed and Mrs. Chen had gone home, Nathan stood in his daughter's doorway watching her sleep. She'd grown so much in the past 2 years, physically, yes, but also in confidence and security. She no longer asked the careful questions of a child trying to make sense of adult hardship. She asked questions of a kid who felt safe, loved, and able to dream without fear. Nathan had given her that. Not alone. Mrs. Chen had helped. Lily's teachers had helped. The stability of the past 2 years had helped. But Nathan had fought for it, had made impossible choices and endured crushing weight to keep her world intact. And now they had this. A good home, a stable life, a future full of possibility. Sweet dreams, kiddo, Nathan whispered. I love you more than you'll ever know. 3 years after his return to Orion Dynamics, Nathan received an invitation to speak at a national conference on corporate ethics. The keynote address they wanted him to deliver, the story of his experience, the lessons learned, the framework he'd built for ethical oversight. He almost declined. Public speaking still made him nervous, and the thought of sharing his story with hundreds of strangers felt exposing in a way that the press conference years ago hadn't. But then he thought about Rebecca, who'd come to him terrified of reporting fraud. He thought about the other employees who'd brought him concerns over the past 3 years, their fear gradually giving way to trust as they realized the system really would protect them. He thought about the person he'd been 5 years ago, desperate for someone to listen, and the person he was now finally in a position to make sure others didn't suffer the same fate. He accepted the invitation. The conference was in Chicago in early fall. Nathan brought Lily with him. She'd never been to Chicago, and he thought the trip could be educational and fun. They spent the day before his speech at the Field Museum, looking at dinosaur bones and ancient artifacts, being tourists together. That night, while Lily slept in the adjoining hotel room, Nathan reviewed his speech one final time. He'd written and rewritten it a dozen times, trying to find the right balance between personal narrative and professional insight. The morning of the keynote, Nathan stood backstage at the conference center, heart pounding, while someone from the organizing committee attached a microphone to his lapel. You're going to be great, she said cheerfully. We have about 600 people registered for this session, biggest crowd of the conference. Nathan's stomach dropped. 600? Don't worry, the lights will be in your eyes. You won't really see them. This, Nathan thought, was not as reassuring as she seemed to think. The introduction was flattering and slightly embarrassing, listing his accomplishments, his role at Orion Dynamics, the impact of his work. Then his name was called and Nathan walked onto the stage to polite applause. He stood at the podium, looking out at a sea of faces blurred by stage lights, and took a breath. 5 years ago, he began, I reported financial fraud at my company and was fired for it. Not because the fraud didn't exist, it did, but because the person I reported it to was the one committing it, and he was skilled enough to make me look like the criminal instead. The room was silent, attentive. I'm not here to tell you a revenge story, or even a redemption story, though there are elements of both in what happened. I'm here to talk about what we get wrong about ethical corporate culture, and what it actually takes to build systems where truth-telling is rewarded instead of punished. For the next 45 minutes, Nathan walked the audience through his experience, the failures that had allowed Richard Langley's fraud to flourish, and the specific changes he'd implemented at Orion Dynamics. He talked about Rebecca and the importance of making employees feel safe reporting concerns. He talked about the structural changes needed to prevent retaliation. He talked about measuring success not by the absence of problems, but by people's willingness to surface them. When he finished, the applause was thunderous. During the Q&A that followed, a woman in the third row raised her hand. Your story is inspiring, she said when Nathan called on her. But I have to ask, after everything you suffered, how did you find it in yourself to come back? To work for the same company that destroyed your life? Most people would have walked away and never looked back. Nathan considered the question carefully. I thought about walking away, he said honestly, for about 5 seconds when the job offer first came. But then I realized something. Walking away would have felt like letting Richard Langley win. He took 5 years of my life. He didn't get to take my career too. More importantly, I realized I was in a unique position to prevent what happened to me from happening to someone else. That felt like a responsibility I couldn't ignore. He paused, thinking about how to articulate the rest. But I also want to be clear, forgiveness isn't a switch you flip. It's an ongoing process. There are still days when I'm angry about what happened, when I think about the years I lost and feel bitter about it. The difference is, I don't let that anger define my present anymore. I used it to build something better. That's not noble or heroic, it's just practical. Anger that drives change is useful. Anger that just consumes you is poison. The session ended, and Nathan was immediately surrounded by people wanting to talk, ask questions, share their own stories of ethical dilemmas at work. He spent an hour in conversations that ranged from practical to deeply personal, and by the time he finally extracted himself, he was exhausted but energized. Lily was waiting in the hotel room with the babysitter the conference had arranged, watching cartoons and eating room service French fries. How was it? She asked when Nathan came in. Good, Nathan said, collapsing onto the couch beside her. Really good, actually. Did you tell them about the bad man who lied? I did. And about how you caught him. That too. Good. Lily returned her attention to the TV. You want a French fry? Nathan took a fry and sat with his daughter in companionable silence, thinking about the strange journey that had brought him here. From maintenance worker to keynote speaker. From invisible to visible. From broken to whole. Or at least, whole enough to function and help others. It wasn't the ending he'd imagined when this all started. It was better. 4 years after his return to Orion Dynamics, Nathan was having coffee with Victoria when she asked him a question that caught him off guard. Are you happy, Nathan? They'd had variations of this conversation before, but something in her tone suggested this wasn't casual inquiry. Yeah, Nathan said. I am. Why do you ask? Victoria set down her coffee cup. Because I've been offered a position, CEO of a larger firm, significant increase in compensation and scope. I'm trying to decide if I should take it, and part of that calculation is whether Orion Dynamics would be in good hands if I left. Nathan felt his stomach drop. You're thinking of leaving? I'm thinking about it, Victoria said carefully. Nothing's decided. But Nathan, if I did leave, the board would need a new CEO, and they've asked me who I'd recommend as my successor. Nathan had a sudden suspicion where this was going. Victoria, I recommended you, she said simply. You're not ready yet. You'd need another year or two in the COO role first, transitioning from compliance into operations, but in 3 years? You'd be ready. You have the integrity, the vision, and the trust of the board. More importantly, you understand this company in a way most executives never will, because you've seen it from every angle. as a director, as a maintenance worker, as someone the system failed, that perspective is invaluable. Nathan sat back, overwhelmed. I never wanted to be CEO. I never even thought about it. Neither did I when I started, Victoria said. But we grow into roles we never imagined. The question isn't whether you want it now, it's whether you could see yourself wanting it eventually. Nathan thought about Lily, now 10 years old and thriving. He thought about the balance he'd built between work and family, the non-negotiables he'd established about being present for the moments that mattered. I'd need guarantees about schedule flexibility, he said slowly, and I'd want to maintain hands-on involvement in compliance and ethics. Those can't just become delegated responsibilities. All negotiable, Victoria said. Think about it. No pressure, no timeline. Just think about it. Nathan did think about it. He thought about it for weeks, discussing it with Mrs. Chen, carefully broaching the topic with Lily, examining his own motivations and fears. In the end, he told Victoria he was interested, but wanted the full 3-year runway she'd suggested. Time to learn operations, build relationships across departments, and make sure he was ready for the responsibility. That works perfectly, Victoria said. Gives me time to set up the other opportunity properly, and gives you time to prepare. We'll make the transition plan official next quarter. 5 years after returning to Orion Dynamics, exactly 5 years after the morning he'd discovered those financial irregularities in the conference room, Nathan sat in his office looking at the nameplate that now read Chief Operating Officer. The CEO transition plan was public knowledge now, and Nathan was being groomed for the role he'd never imagined wanting. His phone buzzed. A text from Lily, now 11 and newly allowed to have a phone for emergencies. Don't forget swim meet tonight at 6. I'm nervous. Nathan smiled and typed back, I'll be there at 5:45. You're going to do great. Love you. Love you too, Dad. Nathan set down his phone and looked out his window at the city spread below. Somewhere out there, people were struggling with ethical dilemmas, wondering if telling the truth was worth the risk, carrying the weight of injustice and hoping someone would listen. He couldn't help all of them, but he could help some. And maybe, if he did this right, he could build something at Orion Dynamics that became a model for other companies. Systems that actually protected whistleblowers, cultures that rewarded truth-telling, leadership that prioritized integrity over convenience. It wouldn't fix the 5 years he'd lost. Nothing could do that. But it might prevent others from losing their own years to fraud and fear. And that, Nathan realized, was enough. More than enough. At 5:30 p.m., Nathan packed up his work, said goodbye to his assistant, and headed out to his car. The swim meet started at 6, and he'd promised Lily he'd be there early. Some things, most things, were more important than work. That evening, Nathan sat in bleachers that smelled of chlorine and watched his daughter swim the 100-meter freestyle. She didn't win, came in 4th out of 6, but she finished strong and climbed out of the pool grinning. Did you see, Dad? I beat my personal record. I saw, Nathan called. I'm so proud of you. Later, driving home with Lily chattering about her race and her friends and her plans for the weekend, Nathan thought about the question Victoria had asked him years ago, the one that had started everything. Are you still upset with me? He told her to ask when the room was empty, when he could answer honestly. The truth was, he wasn't upset anymore. The anger had faded. The bitterness had lost its edge. What remained was gratitude, for the second chance, for the opportunity to build something meaningful, for the life he'd constructed from the wreckage of the one he'd lost. Dad? Lily's voice pulled him from his thoughts. You have that look again. What look? The happy one. The one you get when you're thinking about good stuff. Nathan glanced at his daughter in the rearview mirror and smiled. Yeah, he said. I guess I do. What were you thinking about? Nathan considered his answer. Just how far we've come. How good our life is now. It is pretty good, Lily agreed. Can we get pizza for dinner? Absolutely. They stopped at their favorite pizza place, brought home a large pepperoni, and ate it at their kitchen table while Lily told him increasingly elaborate stories about her friends and their drama. After dinner, after homework, after the evening routine that had become so comfortable it felt like breathing, Nathan tucked Lily into bed. Dad? She said as he was turning off her light. Yeah, kiddo? I'm really glad you took that job, the one where you help people and catch the bad guys. I think it's important. Nathan felt his chest tighten with emotion. Thank you, Lily. That means a lot. And I'm glad you're happy again. For real happy, not just pretending. Miss and Nathan crossed the room and kissed her forehead. Me too, kiddo. Me too. He closed her door and stood in the hallway for a moment, overwhelmed by the simple perfection of this ordinary evening. 5 years ago, he'd been invisible, struggling, fighting just to survive. Now he had this: a daughter who noticed when he was happy, work that mattered, a future full of possibility. It wasn't the life he'd planned. It was better. Nathan walked to his home office and sat at his desk, looking at the framed photo he kept there, the one from the beach, Elena and Lily laughing at something he'd said, frozen in a moment of pure joy. I think we're going to be okay, he said quietly to the photo, to Elena's memory, to the universe in general. I think we really are. And for the first time in 5 years, Nathan believed it completely. The truth had come out. Justice had been served. And Nathan Cole, maintenance worker, whistleblower, survivor, father, executive, was finally, genuinely, impossibly happy. The end.